You are completely safe here tonight. Dim the lights, put on your headphones, and let the outside world fade away. If you enjoy having a reliable place to unwind every week, please consider liking, subscribing, saving this video to your playlist, and ringing the bell. It helps this sanctuary reach more quiet listeners like you. Now close your eyes and listen close. The name above mine. The name above mine did not belong to anyone in the building. It had signed in 1 minute before me every workday for more than 3 months. I only noticed because, on the morning I finally looked closely, the stranger's handwriting had begun to resemble my own. Our company still used a paper sign-in book. We had security gates and electronic access cards, but the book was part of the building's emergency policy. Everyone working past reception had to write their name, company, arrival time, and departure time. The cards tracked doors. The book was supposed to tell the fire marshal who was actually inside. It sat on the front desk beneath a small brass lamp. The cover was black imitation leather. The pages were thick and slightly rough. Each sheet had a printed date at the top and pale blue lines running from margin to margin. A ballpoint pen was attached to the spine with a plastic cord. Every weekday, my routine was the same. I entered through the revolving doors, crossed the lobby, nodded to the receptionist, and scanned my badge. Then I opened the book to the current page. I wrote my name, Jonah Reed. I added my company and the time shown on the digital clock behind reception. Most mornings, I arrived at 8:43. I had never planned it that way. My train, the walk from the station, and the timing of the coffee shop simply placed me in the lobby at almost the same minute each day. The strange name was always written directly above mine. Martin Vale. At first, I assumed he worked for another tenant. There were several companies in the building. I knew the people from my own floor and recognized some familiar faces from the elevators, but I did not know everyone. Martin Vale could have worked anywhere. The first thing that bothered me was the time beside his name, 842. My own entry beneath it read 843. I flipped back one page. Martin Vale, 1842, Jonah Reed, 843. I turned another page. The same two names appeared together. Then another. Then 6 more. Every morning Martin Vale had signed in directly before me. Every morning he had arrived exactly 1 minute earlier. The front desk was quiet while I checked. The receptionist, Mia, was sorting visitor badges into a drawer. I had known her for years in the casual way people know someone they see every workday. We exchanged comments about the weather. She signed for packages. She remembered when I forgot my access card. I asked if she knew Martin Vale. She stopped sorting. Which company? I'm not sure. I turned the book around and pointed to the name. She leaned closer. The brass lamp cast a warm circle across the page. I could see tiny grooves where the pen had pressed into the paper. Mia read the entry, then shook her head. I don't recognize it. He signs in every morning. A lot of people sign in. He comes in 1 minute before me. She smiled slightly. That sounds efficient. I smiled too because that was the normal response. I closed the book and went upstairs. The question followed me through the morning. I worked in an open office where ordinary sounds carried farther than they should. Keyboards clicked. The printer cycled awake and went quiet. Someone opened a can of sparkling water during a conference call. None of it held my attention. I kept thinking about the name, Martin Vale. It was plain enough to belong to anyone. Yet I could not remember seeing it in an email, on a company directory, or beside a profile picture. At lunch, I searched our employee database. No Martin Vale. I checked the tenant directory on the building website. No result. I searched professional networking sites, adding the building address and the names of companies that rented space there. I found several people called Martin Vale, but none appeared connected to the building. That should have settled it. The sign-in book was not a perfect system. Visitors wrote the wrong company. Couriers signed only their first names. People forgot to sign out. Martin Vale might have been a contractor. Still, the next morning I looked for him. I arrived at 84-1. The revolving doors released a breath of cold air into the lobby. A security guard stood near the elevators drinking coffee from a paper cup. Mia was speaking quietly on the phone. The sign-in book lay open. The final completed entry belonged to a woman from an accounting firm. She had signed in at 8,036. The line beneath hers was blank. I waited near the front desk. At 1842, two people entered together. I recognized both. They signed their names and walked toward the elevators. Neither was Martin Vale. A delivery driver came in behind them. He signed on the visitor sheet, which was kept in a separate binder. I looked at the clock. 84-4. Martin Vale had not appeared. I opened the book and wrote my name. Jonah Reed, 844. For the rest of the morning, I felt foolish. The pattern had broken as soon as I paid attention to it. That was what coincidences did. They looked deliberate only from a distance. When I left that evening, I opened the book to record my departure time. Martin Vale's name was directly above mine. His arrival time was 8,004-3. I stared at it until someone behind me cleared his throat. There had been no name above mine when I signed. I was certain of that. I had placed my hand on the blank line while writing. I remembered the texture of the paper beneath the side of my palm. Now Martin Vale occupied that line. The entry looked as if it had always been there. The letters were written in dark blue ink. The first stroke of the M had pressed deeply enough to leave a ridge on the back of the page. The time beside it was 1 minute before mine. 8:43. I touched the ink. It was dry. Mia noticed me standing there. "Everything okay?" I asked when Martin had signed in. She looked at the page. "I didn't see him. You were here all morning. I don't watch every person write their name." There was no name on that line when I arrived. Mia's expression became careful. Not frightened, not dismissive. Careful. You might not have noticed it. The answer was reasonable. That was what made it difficult to argue with. I signed out and left. The next morning Martin Vale was already there. 8,042. I signed beneath him at 84-3. This time I examined the handwriting. His capital M began with a short upward stroke. The second peak was slightly lower than the first. The V in Vale leaned to the right. I opened my notebook and wrote his name several times. My M was different. I started at the top and pulled the line downward. My V was narrow and upright. There was no real resemblance. I had imagined that part. For the next week I checked every morning. Martin Vale always signed in 1 minute before me. If I arrived at 8,040, he had signed at 8,039. If my train was delayed and I arrived at 9,007, his time was 9,006. Once I stopped for breakfast and did not enter the building until 9,031. Martin Vale had arrived at 9,030. His name was always the final entry on the page. There were people listed earlier, sometimes many of them, but between Martin's arrival and mine, there was never another signature. I began asking co-workers. I kept the questions casual. "Do you know a Martin Vale? Does Martin work with facilities? Have we ever had a consultant named Vale?" No one recognized the name. A co-worker named Sarah suggested I ask human resources. She thought he might be part of the building staff. HR searched both current and former employee records. Nothing. Building management checked the registered tenant contacts. Nothing. The security office searched access card records. No, Martin Vale had ever been issued a badge. I told myself that the name was false. Someone had chosen it because they did not want to be identified. That explanation was more uncomfortable. but at least it belonged to the ordinary world. People used false names. People entered buildings without authorization. Records were incomplete. I began watching the lobby. I changed my morning routine so no one could predict when I would arrive. One day, I came in at 7018. Martin had signed at 7017. The next day, I waited at a coffee shop until 10,026. Martin had signed at 10,025. On the third day, I entered the lobby, walked past the desk without signing, and went directly upstairs. I returned at noon. Martin Vale had signed in at 11:58. The line beneath his was blank. I stood over the book while Mia answered a visitor's question. There was no reason to sign at noon. I had already been inside the building for hours. Still, I felt a pressure that was difficult to describe. The empty line beneath Martin's name looked unfinished. I picked up the pen. Jonah Reed, 1159. The moment I completed the final D, the pressure eased. I looked at the two entries. Martin's handwriting was not identical to mine, but the lowercase a in Vale had the same open top as the A in Jonah. I had always written it that way. Most people closed the circle. I left a narrow gap. Martin Vale had started leaving one too. I checked earlier pages. His A had once been fully closed. The change had happened gradually. On older pages, the letter was round and careful. Then a small break appeared at the top. It widened over several weeks. By the most recent entry, it looked like mine. I compared the R in Martin with the R in Reed. Both ended with a faint upward hook. His had not always done that. I felt cold beneath the lobby lights. The heating vents were running. Warm air moved across the desk and lifted the corner of the page. I heard the paper make a soft, dry flutter. Mia returned to her chair. I asked if the same pen was always used. Usually. She lifted the pen attached to the book. It had a clear plastic barrel and a blue cap. The ink inside was nearly empty. Sometimes people use their own. I examined Martin's entry. The ink matched the pen in her hand. The next morning, I brought my own pen. It was a green fountain pen I used for marking documents. The color was dark enough to look almost black unless the paper was held under direct light. Martin's name was waiting above the blank line. It had been written in green ink. I had not removed my pen from my coat. I stood with my hand inside the pocket, touching the smooth barrel. Mia was speaking to the security guard. Neither of them was looking at me. I took out the fountain pen and uncapped it. A small bead of green ink shone on the nib. I wrote my name beneath Martin's. The two entries matched in color, not approximately. Exactly. The same muted green. The same slight shine while wet. The same feathering where the ink entered the rough paper fibers. I pressed a fingertip against Martin's signature. It was dry. Mine was still wet enough to stain my skin. I asked Mia whether anyone had borrowed a green pen. She said no. I showed her the two entries. She tilted the page toward the lamp. That is strange, she said. It was the first time she admitted it. She checked the drawers beneath the desk. There were black pens, blue pens, and one red marker. No green ink. Maybe he carries the same kind, she said. Have you ever seen him? She looked again at the name. I must have. Do you remember him? Mia did not answer for several seconds. No, she said. Her voice had become quieter. For the next few mornings, she watched with me. We did not make an official plan. I simply arrived at different times, and Mia kept the book closed behind the desk until she saw me enter. The first morning, I arrived at 8002. Mia removed the book from beneath the counter and placed it in front of me. She opened to the current page. Martin Vale was already there. 8011. Mia stared at the entry. That wasn't there when I put it away. When did you check? 5 minutes ago. She touched the paper. The ink was dry. She asked the security guard whether anyone had used the book. He said no. The second morning, Mia stored it in a locked drawer. I arrived at 8027. She unlocked the drawer in front of me. Martin's entry was on the page. 8026. The third morning, she used a new sheet. The building normally printed several months of dated sign-in pages at once. Mia removed the next day's sheet from the binder and replaced it with a blank piece of office paper. She drew the columns herself: name, company, time in, time out. She locked the page inside the desk. When I arrived the following morning, Martin Vale had signed the hand-drawn form at 8038. I entered at 8039. The letters were darker than before. The pen had pressed firmly into the page. When I ran my finger beneath the sheet, I could feel each stroke as a raised line. Mia stopped helping after that. She did not say she thought I was imagining it. She did not accuse me of writing the name myself. She simply returned to the official printed pages and avoided looking at Martin's entries. People can live beside something impossible if they do not give it too much attention. I began to understand that. Not knowing was not the same as being safe, but it was quieter. Once you noticed the wrong detail, ordinary life became full of places where other wrong details might be hiding. The signature was only ink. The book was only paper. Yet those two things had begun to feel more certain than my own memory. I knew I had not written Martin Vale. The page knew that someone had. I took several days off. I told my manager I was sick. I stayed home, turned off my work notifications, and left my access card on the kitchen table. On the first day, I tried not to think about the book. On the second, I wrote Martin Vale's name on a sheet of scrap paper. I copied it from memory. The result looked wrong. My hand made the letters too naturally. The M rose and fell with the same uneven peaks. The A remained open at the top. The A ended with the upward hook. I tore the page in half and threw it away. On the third morning, at exactly 8043, I felt the familiar pressure. It was not a sound or a pain. It felt like a form waiting for a missing answer. I pictured the sign-in book under the brass lamp. I pictured Martin Vale's name on the final completed line. Beneath it, an empty space waited for me. When I returned to work, I checked the pages from the days I had been absent. Martin Vale had signed in every morning. 8042. The lines beneath his entries were blank. No one had written directly below him. Other employees had arrived later. Their names began several lines down, leaving a strange, clean space beneath Martin each day. It looked reserved. I showed the pages to Mia. She did not want to discuss them. "You were out," she said. "Yes, so maybe it isn't connected to you." The explanation should have reassured me. It did not. I signed on the current page. Martin Vale, 8242. Jonah Reed, 8242. The pattern resumed. After that, the difference between our times began to shrink. It happened first in the handwriting. Martin stopped writing 8042. He wrote 8040,051. I signed it 8043. The next day, his entry read 804256. I checked the clock before writing mine. 800438 seconds apart. 8 seconds apart. The building did not require seconds. No one else recorded them. I began adding seconds to my own entries. Martin adjusted. He signed at 8041,037. I signed at 8041,042. 5 seconds. Then 4. Then 3. The closer the times became, the fresher his ink appeared. One morning, I touched his signature and lifted a faint blue mark on my fingertip. The ink was still damp. I looked across the lobby. The revolving doors were empty. The security guard was helping a visitor. Mia was opening a package behind the desk. No one had stepped away from the book. Martin's name had been written seconds earlier. I would have heard the pen, the attached ballpoint, scratched loudly across the rough paper. I heard it every morning when I signed, but there had been no sound before mine. The following day, I arrived carrying a black gel pen. Before entering, I decided to print my name in capital letters. No connected strokes, no open lowercase a, no familiar hook on the R. I wanted to leave nothing for the other handwriting to imitate. Martin Vale was already printed in capitals. Martin Vale. The letters were narrow, separated, and slightly tilted to the right. I stared at them. Then I printed my own name beneath his. Jonah Reed. The slant matched. The spacing matched. Even the uneven pressure in the letter E was the same. I stopped trying to change my handwriting. There are habits in the hand that exist below thought. The angle of the wrist, the speed of a downward stroke, the amount of pressure applied when the pen changes direction. I had always believed my handwriting belonged to me because it came from my body. The book suggested something else. Perhaps handwriting was not an expression. Perhaps it was a destination. Martin's signature continued to change. The V in Vale narrowed until it resembled the first angle in my capital R. The long stroke of his T grew shorter. His final E began to trail into a flat line, just as mine did when I was tired. Soon, if I ignored the letters themselves, the two names looked like they had been written by the same person. Different words. One hand. I asked building management to replace the paper sign-in system. They said an electronic visitor system was already being considered. The installation would take several months. I asked whether employees could stop signing in until then. They said the paper record was required for emergency accountability. I thought about stealing the book. I thought about tearing out the pages. I did neither. Those actions felt childish. Worse, they felt pointless. The name appeared on blank paper inside locked drawers. Removing one book would only create another place for it to be written. One evening, I stayed late and waited until the lobby was empty. Mia signed out and left. The overnight guard took her place behind reception. I asked to look through the archived books. He knew me and saw no reason to object. The old volumes were stored in a cabinet behind the desk. Their covers were dusty. The oldest pages smelled dry and faintly sweet, like paper kept too long in a closed room. I searched backward through the year. Martin Vale appeared above me every day. I had worked in the building, not only for 3 months, for years. On my first day at the company, Martin signed in at 8057. I signed at 8:58. I had not noticed him. His handwriting on those early pages looked nothing like mine. It was rounder, slower, almost formal. The farther back I went, the less human the writing seemed. Not monstrous, simply unfamiliar. The letters followed the correct shapes, but the pressure was wrong. Lines deepened in places where a hand should naturally lift. Curves began before the previous strokes had ended. It looked as though something had learned to write by examining finished words without understanding how a pen moved. I closed the oldest book. The lobby was silent except for the ventilation system. The brass lamp illuminated the current sign-in page. Martin Vale's departure column was blank. It had always been blank. I checked page after page. He signed in every morning. He had never once signed out. The overnight guard asked if I had found what I needed. I told him yes. That was not true. I had found something worse than an answer. An unexplained pattern can still be dismissed. A long pattern becomes a rule. The next morning, I arrived at 8:43. Martin Vale had signed at 804259. The blue ink shone beneath the brass lamp. 1 second, his handwriting was now indistinguishable from mine. I picked up the attached pen. For several seconds I could not write. Mia watched from behind the desk, though she pretended to organize envelopes. I lowered the pen and signed. Jonah Reed, 8,043,000. The final D trailed into the same flat line as the E in Vale above it. The next morning, Martin was half a second early. He wrote the time as 8,042,059.5. The day after that, he used no time at all. Beside his name, he drew a short, horizontal line. I almost asked Mia what she saw, but I had learned not to. She could see the ink. She could read the name. What she could not see was its importance. That ignorance protected her. It allowed her to answer calls, accept deliveries, and smile at visitors. The name was only another entry, because she had never placed her own beneath it. I began dreaming about the book. In the dreams, the pages extended beyond the desk and across the lobby floor. Every line contained a name. Some were written in alphabets I could not recognize. Some were only marks pressed into the paper with no ink. None of them had departure times. I always woke before finding my own. The dreams stopped after a week. The absence of them was worse. I no longer needed sleep to picture the pages. Then, on a quiet morning, I entered the lobby and knew the pattern had ended. Nothing looked different. The same brass lamp was on. The same pen lay across the open book. Mia sat behind the desk with a cup of coffee beside her keyboard. I approached. The last completed line contained my name, Jonah Reed. The company column was correct. The arrival time was 1 minute earlier than the clock behind reception. The handwriting was mine, not similar. Mine. The J began with the small hesitation I had developed years ago. The R leaned slightly forward. The second E in Reed was compressed because my hand always moved faster near the end of my surname. I picked up the pen. My fingers settled into the worn grip. I signed the next line, Jonah Reed. The ink remained glossy beneath the lamp. I looked from the wet name I'd just written to the identical name directly above it. The name above mine was no longer copying me. I was copying it. Your number will be called. The number board had passed 900 when I realized no one was coming back out of the consultation room. Every few minutes, another person stood up and walked through the same grey door. Yet the waiting room remained full. My own ticket said A117. I had arrived for something routine. I needed a prescription renewed, and the clinic had asked me to come in because it had been too long since my last appointment. Nothing was seriously wrong with me. That feels important to say. I was not afraid of doctors. I was not waiting for test results. I had no reason to expect anything worse than a short conversation, a few standard questions, and another visit several months later. The clinic occupied the ground floor of a plain medical building. The entrance was beside a pharmacy and across from a small parking lot. Inside, there was a reception desk behind a glass partition, 3 rows of connected chairs, and an electronic number board mounted above a grey door. The room smelled like disinfectant, old carpet, and coffee that had been sitting too long in a paper cup. A water dispenser stood in one corner. Beside it was a narrow table covered with outdated magazines. The air conditioning was set too low. I checked in at the front desk, showed my insurance card, and confirmed my appointment time. The receptionist gave me a paper ticket from a small plastic machine. A117. Have a seat, she said. They'll call you. The ticket was made from thin thermal paper. It felt warm from the printer. The number was large and black, with the clinic name printed beneath it in smaller letters. The board above the consultation room displayed A104. I sat near the aisle. There were 24 chairs in the waiting room. 22 were occupied. Everyone appeared to be an adult. A man in work clothes sat across from me with his hands folded over a sealed envelope. A woman in a dark raincoat was reading a magazine without turning the page. Another man wore headphones and stared at the floor. No one spoke. The only steady sounds were the ventilation system and the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights. After a few minutes, the number board chimed. It was a soft electronic tone, pleasant but slightly too loud for the room. The screen changed from A1004 to A1009. A woman near the water dispenser stood. She placed her phone in her bag, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the gray door. The door had no window. A small sign beside it read, "CO Consultation. Rooms." The woman opened it and stepped through. I saw a strip of beige wall beyond her. Then the door closed. I went back to checking my phone. Several minutes later, the board chimed again. A126. That was the first number I thought was strange. My ticket was A117. If the system was calling numbers in order, it had passed me. I assumed there were different categories of appointments. Maybe the number on the screen belonged to another doctor or another department. A man in a gray sweater stood and entered the same door. No one called my name. I waited. The board chimed again. A143. A woman beside me rose immediately. She had been holding ticket A143 between two fingers. I saw it clearly as she slipped it into her coat pocket. She walked through the gray door. The room should have had 3 empty chairs. It had one. The chair the woman had left was already occupied by a man wearing a tan jacket. I had not seen him sit down. He was looking at his phone, one ankle resting on the opposite knee. A folded ticket was tucked beneath his thumb. I glanced toward the entrance. The glass door was slowly closing. Someone might have come in while I was watching the number board. There was nothing unusual about that. I looked at my ticket again. A117. The board chimed. A168. The man with the sealed envelope stood. He walked toward the gray door without checking his ticket. No nurse came out to greet him. No voice called his name. The electronic number was enough. He opened the door and disappeared into the beige hallway. It closed behind him with a soft hydraulic sigh. I began paying attention to the door. I expected someone to come back through it. In most clinics, patients enter through one door and leave through the same waiting room. Sometimes there is another exit near the examination rooms, but usually you see people returning to reception to book follow-up appointments or collect paperwork. No one returned. The board reached A2001, then A238, then A277. Each time someone in the waiting room stood and went through the gray door. No one questioned the skipped numbers. No one complained about the wait. No one asked why the screen had passed their ticket. The seats remained full. New people appeared among us with the quiet, ordinary presence of people who had been sitting there for hours. I never caught anyone in the act of arriving. Whenever I looked toward the entrance, the same strip of empty hallway showed through the glass. When I looked back, a recently emptied chair would be occupied again. Sometimes the new person was removing a coat. Sometimes they were already reading a magazine. Once, a woman beside the reception desk had a paper cup of water in her hand. I had not heard the dispenser. The board chimed. A309. The man wearing headphones stood. He did not remove the headphones. He walked through the door. A new man was sitting in his chair before the door had finished closing. That was when I first checked the time. I had been waiting for 48 minutes. It felt longer. My appointment had been scheduled for the early afternoon. I had arrived 10 minutes ahead of time, as the clinic requested. The receptionist had told me there might be a short delay. I approached the front desk. The receptionist was typing something on her computer. A half-empty coffee cup sat beside the keyboard. "Excuse me," I said. She looked up. My number was A117. She glanced at the ticket in my hand. "They'll call you. The board is already on 300. She looked toward it. The screen displayed A326. "That's okay," she said. "I think they skipped me." "They haven't skipped you." "How do you know?" She smiled with the practiced patience of someone who answered the same questions every day. "The system keeps track." The board chimed, A341. Someone behind me stood. I heard slow footsteps cross the carpet and the grey door open. I did not turn around. "Is there more than one queue?" I asked. The receptionist looked at my ticket again. "You're in the right place." "What do the numbers mean?" "They tell us who's next." A341 is next. "Yes." "I have A117. "Yes." Her answers were calm and complete. There was no irritation in her voice. There was also no sign that she understood the problem. I lowered my voice. "Has anyone come back out?" She looked toward the grey door. "People leave when they're finished. Through another exit? I believe so." "You believe so?" Her eyes returned to the computer screen. "They'll call you." The glass partition made her voice sound slightly distant. I went back to my chair. The woman in the raincoat still held the same magazine open across her lap. I could not tell whether she was on the same page. I leaned toward her. "Sorry," I said. "Do you know how this queue works?" She looked at me. Her expression was tired but polite. "You wait for your number." They passed mine. She looked at my ticket. A17. Then she looked at the board. A389. "They'll come back to it," she said. "Have you been waiting long?" "A while." "What number do you have?" She showed me her ticket. BAE2. It was not even the same letter. I asked whether she had seen anyone come back through the consultation room door. She considered the question. "No. Doesn't that seem strange?" "They probably leave another way." That was the same explanation the receptionist had offered. It was reasonable. Most frightening things remain manageable while a reasonable explanation is available. You do not have to believe it completely. You only have to believe it enough to keep sitting down. The woman returned to her magazine. The board chimed. A417. A person near the far wall stood and left. The seat remained empty for 6 seconds. I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I looked toward the number board. When I looked back, an older man in a brown coat occupied the chair. His hands rested on the head of a walking cane. I had not heard the entrance. I had not heard the chair move. I checked my ticket. A117. The edges had begun to curl inward. I flattened it against my knee. The paper felt cooler than before. The number looked slightly faded, as if the heat-sensitive ink were aging. I held it beneath the fluorescent light. For a moment, I thought the final digit was a 9, A119. I rubbed my thumb across it. The number was A117 again. I told myself the font was unclear. The board chimed. A472. The woman in the raincoat closed her magazine. She stood and walked toward the grey door. I looked at the ticket she had shown me. B802. "Excuse me," I said. She paused. "That isn't your number." She looked at the board, then at me. "It is now." Her tone was neither confused nor frightened. She opened the door. The beige hallway beyond looked darker than before. She stepped inside. The door closed. Her magazine remained on the chair. I picked it up. The cover was slightly sticky from years of handling. The pages smelled like old paper and cleaning solution. I checked where she had been reading. Every page was blank. The glossy sheets contained no photographs, headlines, or advertisements. Just pale rectangles where printed material should have been. I closed it and placed it back on the table. The board reached A500, then A504, then A663. It did not move, one number at a time. It jumped unpredictably, but each number belonged to someone. A person always stood. A person always entered the gray door. The waiting room never became less crowded. I began counting the chairs again. 24. 23 occupied. The empty chair was always beside me. I changed seats. The chair beside my new one became empty. At first, I thought I had chosen it that way without noticing, so I moved again. The same thing happened. No one sat directly beside me. People filled every other available place, but one chair remained open at my side. It felt less like courtesy than preparation. The board chimed, A719. A man in a business suit rose. As he passed me, I asked what was behind the door. He stopped. The waiting room remained silent around us. "I don't know," he said. "You've been here before?" "Yes." "What happens when they call you?" "You go in." And then he looked at the grey door. His expression did not change, but something in his posture became more relaxed. "Then you don't have to wait anymore." He continued walking. The door opened. For a moment, I saw the beige wall and part of a dark carpet. There was no receptionist on the other side, no nurse, no visible signs pointing toward examination rooms. The man entered. The door closed. I stood. The movement made several people look at me. Their faces showed no interest. They simply registered that someone had moved before returning their attention to their tickets. I walked toward the main entrance. I could see the corridor outside through the glass. The pharmacy sign was visible across the building lobby. Beyond it, daylight shone through the exterior doors. Nothing prevented me from leaving. I placed my hand on the exit bar. The board chimed behind me. I turned, A771. A woman stood and entered the consultation hallway. The receptionist called to me. "If you leave, you may lose your place." I looked back at the glass door. "I can reschedule." "You can." Her voice remained calm. "How long would that take?" She checked her computer. "The next available appointment is some time away." "How long?" She moved the mouse. The screen illuminated her face with a pale blue light. "It doesn't say." I opened the door. Cool air from the building corridor touched my face. The board chimed again. A804. My ticket moved in my hand. I felt the paper tighten against my fingers. When I looked down, the number had changed. A817. The first digit was no longer a 1. The paper was unmarked, no erasure, no overprinting. The black thermal ink formed a clean 8. I stood half inside the waiting room and half in the corridor. The board displayed A804. My number was suddenly close, 13 numbers away. If I left, I might have to begin again. I had already waited more than 2 hours. My reason for staying was ordinary. That was what frightened me later. I did not stay because someone forced me. I did not stay because the exit disappeared. I stayed because leaving after waiting so long felt wasteful. I let the door close. The receptionist gave me a small approving nod. I returned to my chair. The empty seat beside me was waiting. The board chimed. A811. A man stood. A814. A woman stood. A86. Another man stood. My heart began beating harder. I held ticket A817 in both hands. The board went dark. The waiting room remained still. No one turned toward me, but I felt their attention settle around the edges of my body. The screen flickered. A862. A person near reception stood. I felt relief, then shame at feeling relieved. My ticket had changed again. A875. The numbers were not approaching me. They were moving me. I went to the front desk a second time. The receptionist's coffee cup was full again. Steam rose from it. I had watched her finish the cup an hour earlier. My ticket changed, I said. She looked at it. That can happen. No, it can't. The system updates. This is paper. She waited. I heard the fluorescent lights humming above us. The sound seemed louder near the desk, as if the glass partition held it there. What am I waiting for? I asked. Your appointment. With whom? The practitioner assigned to you. What is their name? She looked at the computer screen. Her fingers rested on the keyboard, but she did not type. It will be on the door. There's only one door. Yes. Where do people go after they enter? They finish waiting. The phrase was close to what the man in the suit had said. I leaned toward the glass. Have you ever gone through that door? For the first time, her expression changed, only slightly. Her eyes moved toward the number board, then back to me. No, she said. Why not? I work here. The board chimed, A91. The receptionist looked past me. Someone stood. I returned to the chairs. The room smelled stronger now. Not a new smell, the same disinfectant, carpet, and old coffee. It was simply denser, as if the air had been recirculating for too long. The temperature had dropped. I rubbed my hands together. My phone showed no signal. The clinic's wireless network still appeared, but it required a password. When I opened my messages, the screen froze for several seconds. The time read 4018. The clinic should have been closing soon. No one prepared to leave. No staff member announced the end of the day. The board continued, A947. The display was built for 3 digits, but the numbers compressed themselves to fit. The characters became narrower with every additional digit. When the board showed A2048, a woman holding a canvas bag stood. When it showed A5071, a man near the water dispenser stood. When it showed A18036, the older man with a cane rose carefully from his chair. He left the cane behind. He walked without it toward the grey door. His steps were slow but steady. The door opened. He entered. The cane remained propped against the empty chair. I watched the entrance. I refused to look away. The glass door did not open. No one entered from the building corridor. The consultation door chimed again. A2491. A woman stood and disappeared through it. When I looked back toward the chairs, the older man's cane was gone. A new person occupied his seat. He was wearing a dark green sweater and holding a folded newspaper. His ticket rested on his knee. I asked where he'd come from. He looked up. The front desk. I didn't see you come in. You were probably watching the board. How long have you been waiting? He unfolded his ticket. The paper was yellow at the edges. The printed number contained more digits than I could count at a glance. A while, he said. I asked whether he knew what was behind the grey door. He smiled politely. No one knows before they're called. Does anyone come back? Why would they? His question was sincere. I had no answer that would make sense within the rules of the room. People waited. Numbers appeared. Doors opened. The system did not promise anyone would return. I had assumed that part because I had assumed the place was a clinic. I looked around at the health posters on the walls. One showed a person drinking water beside a list of wellness tips. Another showed an outline of a seated figure stretching at a desk. The words had become difficult to read. The letters were clear, but they no longer formed useful sentences. They looked like instructions, copied from something older. I could still recognize individual words. Wait. Ready. Called. Inside the room, those words required no explanation. I wondered how long the system had existed. Not the clinic. Not the computer or the number board. The simple idea beneath them. A mark is given. A place is taken. A name or number is called. A door opens. Human beings trust sequences. We find comfort in being told There is an order, even if we cannot see it. A queue turns the unknown into something that feels temporary. You are not lost. You are waiting. The difference may exist only while your number has not been called. The board chimed. A103882. My ticket read A1000 and 3091, 19 numbers away. I laughed once. It was a quiet sound, but several people looked at me. Their expressions were not offended. They seemed concerned that I might disturb the process. I stood again. This time I did not go to reception. I walked directly to the main exit. The receptionist did not warn me. My hand touched the bar. Behind me, the board chimed. A1030-900. The entire waiting room went silent. The air conditioning stopped. The fluorescent hum stopped. Even the pages of the magazine stopped moving. My ticket felt warm. I turned it over. On the back, where the paper had previously been blank, 4 words had appeared. Please remain until called. The lettering was small and grey. It looked as if it had always been there. I opened the exit door. The building corridor outside was empty. The pharmacy was closed. Its metal security grille had been pulled down. The exterior lobby beyond it was dark, though daylight had been visible there minutes earlier. I stepped into the corridor. The clinic door closed behind me. I walked toward the main building lobby. My shoes made flat, lonely sounds against the polished floor. I passed a restroom, a locked office, and a vending machine with its lights turned off. At the end of the corridor, I found another glass door. Through it, I could see the waiting room, the same rows of chairs, the same reception desk, the same electronic board. I stopped. I had not walked in a circle. The corridor had been straight. Still, the waiting room lay ahead of me. The glass door opened when I pushed it. No one looked up as I entered. My empty chair remained beside the man with the newspaper. The receptionist's coffee cup steamed behind the glass. The board displayed A103900. I sat down. The air conditioning began again. The fluorescent lights resumed their steady hum. The man beside me refolded his newspaper. Almost there, he said. I did not answer. The board remained on the same number for a long time. My phone battery reached 1% and shut down. The digital clock behind reception no longer displayed a time. 4 horizontal lines glowed on its face. I studied the people around me. Some appeared tired. Some appeared bored. Some held their tickets with both hands. None looked frightened. I envied them. They did not count the people entering the door. They did not watch the chairs refill. They did not wonder why no one returned. Their ignorance allowed them to wait peacefully. Mine had ended the moment I noticed the first missing person. Knowledge did not help me leave. It only made every remaining minute more difficult. The board chimed. A1000 and 3901. The number matched my ticket. No one else stood. I remained seated. The screen flashed. A103001. The electronic tone sounded again. Every person in the waiting room turned toward me. They moved at exactly the same time. No expression changed. No one pointed. No one spoke. They simply looked at me with the calm attention of people waiting for the correct person to follow the correct instruction. The receptionist pressed the button behind the glass. A soft click came from the grey door. It had unlocked. I looked down at my ticket. The number had changed again. A1. The board displayed A1. I stood. The room seemed larger from my feet. The aisle between the chairs stretched toward the consultation door. The carpet was worn smooth along the center, as if countless people had followed the same path. I took one step, then another. No one looked away. I passed the water dispenser. The clear bottle above it was empty. though I could hear water moving somewhere inside the machine. I passed the magazine table. Every cover was blank. I reached the gray door. The small sign beside it no longer said consultation rooms. It said now serving. I placed one hand on the metal handle. Before pushing it, I looked back. Every chair was empty. The waiting room had cleared without movement or sound. No receptionist sat behind the glass. Her computer screen was dark. The coffee cup remained beside it, but no steam rose now. The magazines lay untouched. The abandoned tickets were gone. The entire room looked closed and unused. Then the entrance door opened. A man stepped inside. He was an ordinary adult, wearing a rain jacket. He paused near reception and looked around, uncertain. A paper ticket was already in his hand. He noticed me standing at the consultation room door. We made brief eye contact. The polite, uncomfortable kind shared by strangers in waiting rooms. He sat in the chair nearest the aisle. The ticket rested on his knee. Even from across the room, I could read the number, A1. It was the same creased ticket I had been holding. The one in my hand was gone. I turned back to the gray door and reached for the handle. The door opened before I touched it. Thur, the person at the edge of the photograph. There were 13 people at the retirement dinner. I know that because I booked the table for 12 and had to ask the restaurant to add one more chair. But when I counted the people in the photograph last month, there were 14. The photograph had been on my bookshelf for years. It stood between a row of paperbacks and a small ceramic bowl where I dropped spare keys. The frame was plain black wood. The glass had a scratch near the lower right corner. I had bought it from a home goods store because it was the right size and because I did not care enough to look for anything better. The picture showed a group of us from my old office. We had taken it after our department manager retired. We were all adults. Most of us were tired from work, slightly overdressed, and holding glasses we had forgotten to put down. The restaurant had pushed 2 tables together near the back wall. Behind us was a framed print of a harbor at sunset. The colors in the photograph were warm and a little too yellow. The flash had made everyone's skin look pale. I remembered the evening well enough. I remembered whose drink had spilled. I remembered the long speech our manager gave before dessert. I remembered standing outside afterward while 3 co-workers argued over the rideshare fare. There was nothing important about that night, but the photograph had preserved it more clearly than most important things. That was why the extra person bothered me. He stood at the far left edge of the group, half behind a co-worker named Martin. Only his head and one shoulder were visible. He was wearing a dark jacket. His face was slightly blurred, as if he had moved when the camera flashed. Everyone else was sharp. I leaned closer to the glass. At first, I assumed he was a server who had accidentally stepped into the frame. That explanation felt so reasonable that I almost stopped looking. Then I noticed the angle of his body. He was not passing behind us. He was facing the camera. I took the frame from the shelf and carried it to the dining table. The room was quiet except for the refrigerator humming in the next room and the faint movement of traffic outside. Under the ceiling light, the photograph looked older than I remembered. The glossy surface had begun to dull around the edges. A thin line of dust had collected inside the frame where the backing did not sit flat. I counted again, 14. I counted from left to right, touching the glass above each head. Martin, Claire, Owen, Lucy, Peter, Ruth, Daniel, me, then the others, ending with our manager and his partner. 13 people I knew, and the man at the edge. I turned the frame over. The paper backing was held in place by 4 metal tabs. On the cardboard, in my own handwriting, I had written the restaurant's name and the date. Below that, I had written all 13 of us for once. I sat at the table for a while with the frame in my hands. There was no reason I would have written 13 if 14 people had been there. Still, memory is not a ledger. It fills gaps without asking permission. It removes details that seem unimportant. I had no trouble believing I had forgotten a guest from a dinner that had taken place years ago. The strange part was that I could name everyone else immediately. The man at the edge gave me nothing. No name. No voice. No sense that I had ever seen him in a hallway or passed him near the elevators. Even his clothes seemed blank. They were ordinary in the way clothes become ordinary when remembered badly. I removed the backing and slid the photograph out. Old photographic paper has a particular feel. It is stiffer than printer paper and smoother than a magazine page. The front was cool and faintly tacky under my thumb. The back had yellowed near the corners. There was no sign of alteration. No cut line. No pasted section. No difference in grain around the man. He belonged to the photograph as completely as the rest of us did. I put it back into the frame. Before returning it to the shelf, I took a picture of it with my phone. I zoomed in on the stranger until his face became a patchwork of pale squares. That made him less human, but not less familiar. For the rest of the evening, I found myself looking toward the bookshelf. The frame was too far away for me to see individual faces. It became a dark rectangle holding a cluster of light shapes. Once I knew there was an extra shape among them, I could not stop trying to locate it. I turned the frame face down before going to bed. The next morning, I felt foolish. Daylight made the apartment ordinary again. The blinds cast narrow bars across the floor. The coffee maker clicked while it warmed. Someone upstairs dragged a chair across the ceiling. I picked up the frame and looked at the photograph. The stranger was still there. I counted 14 people. Then I noticed that I could see more of him. The change was small. His shoulder was no longer hidden behind Martin. A strip of his shirt showed beneath the dark jacket. I opened the photograph on my phone. In the picture I had taken the previous night, only his head and part of one shoulder were visible. I compared the screen with the print until my coffee went cold. There was no question about it. He had moved several inches to the right. Not while I watched. Nothing in the photograph had moved in front of me. There had been no flicker, no sliding image, no impossible motion beneath the glass. The photograph was simply different from the way it had been before. That distinction mattered to me. Movement would have been easier, in a way. Movement would have been an event. I could have recorded it. I could have waited for it to happen again. This was only a correction made while I was not looking. I left the frame on the table and went to work. During my commute, I enlarged the phone image several times. The stranger's face was blurred, but not evenly. His hairline was visible. So was the dark suggestion of an eyebrow. The lower half of his face had been washed into the restaurant wall. I sent the image to Martin. I asked if he remembered who the man behind him was. Martin replied during lunch. What man? I circled the stranger and sent the picture again. After a few minutes he wrote, maybe restaurant staff? I asked if he remembered a server joining the photograph. No, but that night was a long time ago. Then he added, that's a weird-looking guy. I asked what he meant. He did not answer until later. Nothing. Just blurry. The room smelled faintly of dust warmed by the heating vent. For several seconds, I did not want to approach the photograph. That reaction embarrassed me more than the photograph frightened me. It was paper in a frame. Whatever had happened, it had happened to an object. Objects could be put away. I crossed the room and picked it up. The stranger had moved again. He was no longer behind Martin. He stood beside him now, occupying a narrow space that had not existed before. The group had adjusted around him. Martin had shifted slightly toward Claire. Claire's shoulder overlapped Owen's arm. The entire left side of the photograph looked more crowded. No one's pose had changed. Their heads remained tilted at the same angles. Their smiles were identical. The folds in their clothing were the same. They had been compressed without moving. The stranger's face had also become clearer. I could see that he was looking directly into the camera. His expression was neutral. Not unhappy. Not threatening. He looked like someone who had been told to stand still for a photograph and was waiting for the flash. I compared the print with the image on my phone. The difference was obvious. I took another picture. Then I placed the frame inside a kitchen drawer beneath a stack of dish towels. I told myself I was preserving it from light. The following day I called Claire. She remembered the dinner better than Martin did. She remembered where everyone had sat and what she had ordered. When I asked how many people attended, she said 13 without hesitation. I asked whether anyone had joined us for the photograph. There was a pause. No, she said. Why? I told her about the man at the edge. She laughed softly, though not because it was funny. It was the polite laugh people use when a conversation has become more serious than expected. Send it to me. I sent the photograph from my phone. She called back instead of replying. I don't recognize him, she said. Her voice had changed. It was flatter. Neither do I. Was he really standing that close to Martin? Not at first. There was another pause. I had not intended to say that. Claire asked what I meant, and I gave her the simplest version. I said the print seemed different from the phone image. She suggested the angle of the glass might be distorting it. Then she suggested that my phone camera had cropped the edge. Then she asked whether the photograph had ever been scanned or reprinted. Each explanation became less confident than the last. Finally she said, maybe don't keep looking at it. It was an odd thing to say. I asked why. I don't know, she said. I just don't like his face. I opened the drawer after the call. The photograph had changed again. The man now stood fully inside the group. He was between Martin and Claire, though I knew there had never been room for anyone there. His dark jacket was visible down to the waist. One hand rested at his side. The other was hidden behind Claire. His face was sharper. At the same time, Martin's face had begun to blur. The effect was slight. His features were still recognizable, but the focus around his eyes had softened. His mouth seemed pale and unfinished. It looked like damage from moisture, except the glossy surface was smooth. I checked the phone photographs. Martin had been clear in both. I carried the print to the window and tilted it under the afternoon light. The blur did not sit on top of the image. It was not mold, fading, or a smear. The photograph had been printed that way. The stranger's face now had more detail than Martin's. I put the picture into a large envelope and sealed it with tape. Then I placed the envelope in the back of my desk drawer. For almost a week, I did not open it. I still thought about it. At home, my attention kept drifting toward the desk. At work, I tried to reconstruct the arrangement of people at the dinner. I drew a rough plan of the table on a notepad. I listed every person who had attended. 13 names. I found the original invitation in an old email folder. 12 guests had confirmed. Our manager's partner had come unexpectedly, making 13. No stranger was copied on the email. I searched old messages from the night of the dinner. There were jokes about the food and several blurry photographs taken on phones. Most showed people seated at the table. None showed the full group. In one photograph, Martin and Claire stood near the restaurant bar. There was empty space between them. I examined that empty space longer than I should have. The wall behind them was dark wood. A brass light fixture cast a warm circle above their heads. Nothing stood between them. Still, the center of that empty space seemed slightly out of focus. I downloaded the image at full resolution. The blur remained. It was not shaped like a person. It was only a vertical softness in the room, easy to overlook unless you were trying to place someone there. I closed the file. That night I dreamed of the restaurant. Nothing happened in the dream. We sat at the table and talked. Plates were cleared. Coffee was poured. The stranger stood at the edge of the room and waited to be invited into the picture. When I woke, the apartment was dark and very quiet. I could hear the heating pipes cooling inside the wall. I went to the desk. The tape on the envelope was unbroken. I cut it open with a letter opener and removed the frame. The stranger stood close to the center. He was behind the second row now, only 2 people away from me. Martin's face had nearly vanished. His head was still there. His hair, collar, and ears remained. But the center of his face had faded into a pale oval, like an overexposed patch of sky. Claire was beginning to soften as well. The stranger had become clearer. I could see the line of his nose. I could see the small crease between his eyebrows. His hair was combed in a way that felt familiar. I looked at the version saved on my phone. He no longer resembled the same person, or rather, he resembled a later version of himself. A corrected version. The early blur had hidden the shape of his features. Now the photograph seemed to be deciding what those features were. I took another picture, though I no longer believed pictures of the picture would help. Before putting the frame away, I marked the stranger's position on the glass with a dry erase pen. I drew a small red line above his head. I marked my own position with a blue line. In the photograph, I stood near the middle, leaning slightly forward. I remembered someone behind the camera telling us to squeeze together. The stranger was now 3 heads to my left. I locked the frame inside a metal filing box. The next morning I called the print shop, whose name appeared faintly on the back of the photograph. The business was still open, though under different ownership. The person who answered explained that old customer files were not kept indefinitely. I asked whether chemical damage could cause one person to become clearer while the others faded. He asked if the photograph had been exposed to moisture or direct sunlight. I said no. He suggested bringing it in. I did not. The idea of handing it to someone else made me uneasy. I told myself I did not want to sound irrational. The truth was simpler. I did not want the photograph out of my possession. That feeling arrived without warning. Until then, I had wanted to hide it, seal it away, or throw it out. Now I imagined a stranger carrying it into a back room, leaving it under a lamp, perhaps taking it home by mistake. The thought made my stomach tighten. The photograph belonged with me. I recognized how strange that was, but recognition did not weaken it. I contacted Owen next. He said he remembered only 12 people at the dinner. When I reminded him about our manager's partner, he corrected himself. Gripe. 13. I sent him the latest phone image. His response came almost immediately. Who is standing next to you? The stranger was not next to me yet. I wrote that, Owen called. What do you mean yet? I explained more carefully this time. I described how the stranger's position had changed and how Martin's face was fading. Owen remained silent for so long that I checked whether the call had dropped. Then he said, Martin looks fine. I opened the image I had sent. On my screen, Martin's face was a pale blank. Owen insisted he could see him clearly. I asked him to describe Martin's expression. He's smiling. Show me. Owen sent the image back with a circle drawn around Martin's head. The circled face was still blank on my phone. I asked who stood between Martin and Claire. No one, he said. I looked at the stranger occupying that exact space. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Owen asked whether I had been sleeping properly. It was a fair question. I told him I had. He said old photographs could play tricks on people. He reminded me that our brains search for faces in unclear patterns. I thanked him and ended the call. Afterward, I realized the photograph was no longer changing for everyone in the same way. Or perhaps it never had. Claire had seen the stranger. Owen had not. Martin had called him weird-looking but had not remembered him. The print was a single physical object. It should have offered the same evidence to every pair of eyes. Instead, it seemed to know what each person was prepared to recognize. That evening, I opened the filing box. The red line I had drawn above the stranger was now over Claire's head. The blue line remained over mine. The stranger stood between them. He had moved beneath the glass without disturbing the ink on its surface. He was one person away from me. Claire's face had faded to the same pale softness as Martin's. Owen's features were beginning to lose contrast. The harbor print behind us had also changed. Its warm sunset had become a flat gray band. The restaurant itself seemed less certain. The tablecloth had lost its pattern. The glasses had become faint shapes. The wall behind us looked farther away than before, as if the room inside the photograph had gained depth. The stranger was the sharpest thing in it. I could see the texture of his jacket. I could see one button at the cuff. A few strands of hair lay across his forehead. His face was still not completely clear, but something about it made me uncomfortable in a new way. He did not merely look familiar. He looked related to me. Not like a brother or cousin. The resemblance was less specific than that. It was in the spacing of the eyes and the slight downward turn at one corner of the mouth. I carried the frame to the bathroom where the light was brightest. I did not look at the mirror. I kept my attention on the photograph. The stranger's head was tilted at the same angle as mine. I checked the earlier phone images. At the edge of the group, his head had appeared straight. In the second image, it had tilted slightly. In each version, his posture had become more like my own. He was not moving toward me, alone. He was learning how I stood. I put the frame face down on the counter. For the first time, I considered destroying it. I pictured tearing the photograph into strips. I pictured soaking it in the sink until the paper separated into soft layers. I pictured cutting out the stranger's face. Each idea produced the same quiet certainty. Damage to the photograph would not restore what had already changed. It might only remove my ability to see it happening. For years, the photograph had seemed to prove that the dinner took place. It proved that 13 adults had stood together beneath warm lights after a meal. Now, it proved something else. It proved that a fixed record was only fixed while nobody questioned it. I returned the frame to the desk. Over the next several days, I established a routine. Each morning before work, I photographed the print under the same lamp. I placed the frame on a sheet of white paper and aligned its lower edge with a pencil mark. I used a small tripod so the angle would remain consistent. Each evening, I repeated the process. I labeled the images by date and time. The changes continued. They were too small to notice from one image to the next. Across several days, they were undeniable. The stranger shifted inward by fractions. His shoulder emerged from behind Owen. Then his sleeve touched mine. Then a narrow gap opened between us, so as the group had no room to expand. People at the edges began to fade. First their faces lost detail, then their clothes blended into the restaurant wall. Their outlines remained for a while, thin and colorless. After that, they were simply gone. The group did not close around the empty spaces. The room behind them expanded. Each disappearance revealed more of the wall, more of the harbor print, more dim space that I did not remember being inside the restaurant. The photograph became wider without changing its dimensions. That is the only way I can describe it. The image contained more distance than the paper should have allowed. The group appeared farther away. The back wall receded. The stranger and I remained sharp and close to the camera while everyone else drifted into a depth that had not existed before. I stopped contacting former coworkers. I did not want to ask whether they remembered people who were disappearing. I was afraid they would say yes. I was more afraid they would say no. Instead, I searched through the storage box in my closet. It held old documents, spare cables, birthday cards, and 2 thick photo albums. The albums smelled of paper, adhesive, and the faint, dry sweetness of dust. Their plastic sleeves had become cloudy with age. I found other photographs from the same period. There was one from a summer office picnic, one from a team building event at a rented conference center, one from a holiday party in a hotel ballroom. The stranger was not in any of them. I checked each picture under the lamp. I counted the people. I compared faces. Nothing changed. Relief came so quickly that I had to sit down. The problem belonged to one photograph. One evening, one object that could be sealed away. I placed the other photographs back into the album and carried the album to the desk. Then I looked at the framed picture again. The stranger was standing beside me. No gap remained between us. His shoulder touched mine. His face was almost clear. I knew before I admitted it. The shape of his jaw was mine. The crease between his eyebrows was mine. Even the uneven way his hair lay near the temple matched the way mine looked when I went too long without a haircut. There were differences. He looked calmer. His posture was straighter. His expression held none of the effort visible in my own smile. But he had my face, not close enough to call identical. Close enough to make the remaining differences feel temporary. The original version of me still stood beside him, leaning toward the group with a tired smile and one hand in my pocket. The two of us looked like separate attempts at the same person. I closed the album without checking the other photographs again. That night, I left every light in the apartment on. I sat on the couch and listened to the ordinary sounds of the building. Water moved through pipes. A door closed in the hallway. The elevator motor started and stopped behind the wall. The framed photograph remained on the table. From the couch, I could not make out individual faces. Still, I knew where both versions of me stood. I wondered what a memory was without evidence. Most of the dinner existed only in fragments. I remembered the taste of coffee. I remembered the pressure of someone's arm against mine when we crowded together for the picture. I remembered the camera flash leaving a pale mark in my vision. I could not remember who had stood on my left. That absence troubled me. According to the original photograph, Owen had stood there. According to the changing photograph, the stranger stood there now. According to my memory, there had always been someone beside me, but I could no longer bring the person's face to mind. The photograph was not only changing the record was changing what I could remember. I slept briefly near dawn. When I woke, the apartment lights looked weak against the grey morning. My neck ached from the couch. The room smelled stale and overheated. I checked the frame. The other man's face was clear. It was mine. Every line was recognizable. The slightly uneven eyebrows, the faint mark near the chin, the tired skin beneath the eyes. He looked directly at the camera. The original me did not. That version of me now seemed to be looking slightly to one side, distracted by something beyond the frame. His features had begun to soften. I touched the glass above his face. The blur was clean. There was no distortion or damage. His eyes were simply less definite than they had been the night before. Beside him, the other me was perfectly focused. He wore the dark jacket I had mistaken for a stranger's. I owned that jacket. It hung in the back of my closet. I had not worn it to the dinner. At least, I did not think I had. I opened the closet and found it beneath a garment bag. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and enclosed air. One cuff had a dark button identical to the one visible in the photograph. In the pocket, I found a folded receipt from the restaurant. The The date matched the handwriting on the back of the photograph. I stood in the bedroom holding the receipt for a long time. There were several possible explanations. I might have worn the jacket earlier and removed it before the photograph. I might have put the receipt into the pocket later. I might have forgotten more of the evening than I believed. Each explanation was ordinary. Together, they felt worse than anything impossible. I called Claire again. The number went to voicemail. I left the message asking her to call when she had time. Then I tried Martin. He answered, but the conversation felt strained. When I mentioned the dinner, he said he barely remembered it. I asked whether I had worn a dark jacket. Probably, he said. I asked who had stood beside me in the group photograph. You did, he said. I thought I had misheard him. What do you mean? You were near the middle. Who stood next to me? There was a pause. You were next to yourself. He laughed once, quietly. Then he stopped. Sorry, he said. That came out wrong. I asked him to explain. I don't know. I meant Owen, maybe. I'm looking at the picture you sent. Which picture? The group shot. Do you see two of me? Another pause. No, he said. His voice sounded careful now. Which one do you see? What do you mean, which one? I ended the call. The photograph had reached a point where questions no longer gave me information. They only showed me that other people's memories were becoming as unreliable as mine. I opened the photo album. The plastic pages whispered as I turned them. In the office picnic photograph, I stood near a folding table with several co-workers. Everyone was an adult. The daylight was bright, and the colors had faded toward blue. At the far edge of the picture stood a man in a dark jacket. Only his head and one shoulder were visible. I closed the album. Then I opened it again. He remained at the edge. I checked the holiday party photograph. He stood behind a decorative plant near the hotel wall, blurred by shadow but facing the camera. In the conference center photograph, he appeared through an open doorway at the back of the room. He had not been there the previous night. I was certain of that. I took out every photograph I owned. I spread them across the dining table, the floor, and the kitchen counter. Some showed family gatherings. Some showed friends at birthdays, co-workers at lunches, adults standing outside rented cabins, adults leaning together in living rooms after dinner. The photographs covered decades of ordinary life. The stranger appeared in 6 of them, always at the edge, always partially hidden, always facing the camera. In the oldest photograph, the colors had faded to soft brown and green. I stood among several relatives at an anniversary dinner. The man was barely visible behind a curtain. His face was only a pale blur. I did not need to wait for it to become clear. I knew who it would be. I returned to the frame group photograph. The original me was almost gone. My clothes remained. The outline of my body remained. One hand could still be seen in the pocket of my shirt. My face had faded into the restaurant wall. Beside that empty outline, the other me stood in perfect focus. He was smiling now. It was not a threatening smile. It was the mild, patient expression people use when a photograph takes longer than expected. Around him, the rest of the group had become a collection of pale forms. Their identities were draining away without drama. No warped faces, no signs of pain, only less detail, less color, less proof. I thought about throwing every photograph away. Instead, I put them into neat rows. I arranged them by date. I placed the oldest at one end of the table and the newest at the other. The progression was visible. In the oldest picture, he was a blur near the edge. Years later, he stood closer. In more recent photographs, he had already reached the group. He was not moving through the pictures in the order they had been taken. He was moving through my life all at once. The past was not a line to him. It was a room full of open doors. I watched the photographs until evening darkened the windows. The glass in the frame caught the lamplight, but I adjusted it so the glare moved away. I did not want to mistake reflection for evidence. I did not want anything in the room interfering with what the photograph showed. The original me disappeared sometime after midnight. There was no moment of change. I looked away to check the oldest photograph. When I looked back, the space beside the other me was empty. No outline remained. No pale face. No hand in a pocket. The group had closed around the space as if nobody had ever stood there. The count was 13 again. I counted twice. 12 co-workers, friends and partners. And me, wearing the dark jacket. The photograph looked balanced. Nothing stood at the edge. Nothing appeared out of place. It was, once again, a perfectly ordinary picture of 13 adults at a retirement dinner. I turned it over. On the cardboard backing beneath the date, my handwriting still read, "All 13 of us, for once." For the first time, the sentence seemed correct. I opened the album and checked the office picnic photograph. The new version of me stood among the group, sharp and centered. Near the folding table, the old version of me had begun to fade. I checked the holiday party, the same thing. The dark, jacketed me was clearer than everyone else. The person I remembered being had softened around the eyes and mouth. I moved from picture to picture. In everyone, the replacement had entered. In everyone, the original was becoming less distinct. Some photographs contained both of us. Others already contained only him. I tried to remember being in the pictures. The memories were still there, but they no longer belonged to a single point of view. I remembered standing near the folding table at the picnic. I also remembered watching myself from the edge of the field. I remembered entering the hotel ballroom through the front doors. I also remembered waiting beside the decorative plant before anyone arrived. The two memories rested beside each other without conflict. That frightened me more than the photographs. I gathered them and placed them back into the album. My hands moved slowly. The plastic sleeves made a soft, dry sound as I closed each page. When I reached the final empty sleeve, I found one photograph I had never seen before. It showed my apartment. The angle was from the far end of the living room, near the bookshelf. I was sitting at the dining table beneath the warm ceiling light. Old photographs surrounded me. My head was lowered as I examined the framed group picture. The image was sharp. The colors were fresh. On the back, in handwriting identical to mine, was today's date. I looked toward the bookshelf. There was no camera there, only a narrow empty space between the paperbacks and the ceramic key bowl. I turned the photograph over again. Below the date, someone had written a short note. The ink was still wet. It said, "All one of us for once." I raised my head and looked across the room. Nothing had changed. The blinds were closed. The lights were steady. The heating vent breathed warm air across the floor. Everything I owned remained in its familiar place. I was alone. I looked down at the new photograph one last time. At the edge of the picture, behind the version of me sitting at the table, another figure had begun to come into focus. He was wearing what I had on now, and I no longer knew which of us had found the photographs first. "4. The bag in the recycling room. The first time I found my trash before I had thrown it away, I blamed the smell. The recycling room was warm, sour, and bright with fluorescent light. It was the kind of place that made everything feel used, even the things still in your hands. But the blue ceramic mug lying on top of the open bag was mine, including the small chip beneath the handle. I had used it that morning. My building had a shared trash and recycling room on the lowest residential level. It was a square room with painted concrete walls and a heavy metal door that closed by itself. Inside were 2 large garbage bins, 3 blue recycling carts, and a separate area for flattened cardboard. A laminated sign above the carts listed what belonged in each one: paper, metal, plastic containers, glass bottles. The sign had been there so long that its corners had curled away from the wall. I usually went down once a week. I kept a small trash can beneath the kitchen sink and a paper grocery bag beside it for recycling. Empty cans went into the bag, so did clean jars, cardboard sleeves, and the mail I did not need to keep. When the bag became too full to lift by one handle, I took it downstairs. It was one of those chores that required almost no thought. I would leave my apartment, walk to the elevator, and listen to the recycling shift softly against itself as I went down. The cans made a thin metallic sound. Cardboard rubbed against paper. The elevator always smelled faintly of floor cleaner and someone else's laundry detergent. The recycling room had its own smell. Damp cardboard came first, then plastic, then a mild acidic odor from the garbage bins. The building staff cleaned the floor every few days, so there was also a sharp disinfectant smell that sat above everything else without hiding it. I never stayed longer than necessary. That evening, I carried down a grocery bag of recycling and 1 tied kitchen bag. I dropped the garbage into the nearest black bin. Then I opened the lid of the paper and container cart. A black trash bag was sitting on top of the loose recycling. That was against the building rules, but it was not unusual. People ignored the signs. They put plastic bags into the paper cart and cardboard boxes into the garbage. Management sent polite reminders. Nothing changed. The black bag had split along one side. Through the opening, I saw the blue mug. It had rolled against an empty cereal box. Beside it was a white takeout container, a coffee bag, several envelopes, and a paperback book with a bent black cover. I recognized all of them. The cereal box was the same brand I bought. The coffee bag had the same dark green label. The paperback was the novel beside my bed. That alone was not impossible. None of those things was rare. The mug was different. I had owned it for years. The glaze was darker near the bottom, almost navy blue. There was a white line inside the rim where a crack had formed beneath the surface. The chip under the handle was shaped like a small crescent. I looked down at the mug in the bag. The crescent chip was there. I did not touch it at first. The fluorescent fixture above me gave off a thin electrical hum. Somewhere behind the wall, a pipe clicked as it cooled. The recycling room door had closed, leaving me alone with the bins. I thought about the mug sitting in my kitchen. I had rinsed it after breakfast. I remember placing it upside down on the drying mat. A small line of water had run from its rim toward the edge of the counter. I reached into the bag. The plastic was cool and slightly damp. It made a dry whispering sound against my sleeve. I took out the mug and held it beneath the light. There was dried coffee at the bottom. I rubbed my thumb over the chip. The rough edge caught against my skin exactly as I remembered. I put the mug back. Then I noticed the paperback. The book inside the bag was swollen along one edge, as if it had been left near moisture. A receipt marked a page near the middle. Upstairs, my copy had a grocery receipt marking the chapter where I had stopped reading. I lifted the book out and opened it. The receipt came from the store near my building. The date was recent. The items listed were ordinary: coffee, cereal, dish soap, paper towels. They were the same things I had bought earlier that week. The final 4 digits on the payment line matched my card. I read them 3 times. The room seemed to become quieter around me. I checked the envelopes next. Most had been torn in half. One showed part of my name. Another showed my apartment number. The paper was soft from being handled. It smelled faintly of coffee and whatever had leaked inside the bag. I placed everything back exactly as I had found it. Then I took several photographs with my phone. I did not know what else to do. Calling the police over a bag of familiar recycling seemed unreasonable. Asking building management would require an explanation I could not yet give without sounding confused. I needed to check my apartment first. I left my own recycling beside the cart and went upstairs. The elevator took longer than usual. I watched the floor numbers change above the door and held my empty grocery bag against my side. When I reached my apartment, the blue mug was on the drying mat. Water still clung to the inside. The paperback was beside my bed. My receipt marked the same chapter. The corners were dry and flat. I carried both objects to the kitchen table. The mug from upstairs and the mug in the recycling room were not merely similar. I knew that without bringing them together. I knew the position of the chip. I knew the faint white crack inside the rim. Still, there were ordinary explanations available. A previous tenant might have owned the same mug. Someone could have picked up my discarded mail. The receipt could have shown similar purchases. I might have misread the card number in the harsh light. I wanted those explanations to remain possible. I washed my hands and made dinner. The apartment sounded normal. The refrigerator motor started and stopped. Water moved through the heating pipes. A neighbor closed a cabinet somewhere beyond the wall. Before bed, I checked the photographs on my phone. The card digits were clear. They matched. The next morning, I went back to the recycling room before work. The black bag was gone. The cart had been emptied. Its blue plastic bottom was visible beneath a few loose flyers and an empty glass jar. I stood there holding the door open. The room smelled stronger after the morning collection. Wet streaks crossed the concrete floor where the carts had been moved. A piece of flattened cardboard leaned against the wall. There was no mug, there was no book. There was nothing I could show anyone except the photographs on my phone. I went upstairs and marked my mug with a permanent marker. On the bottom, beneath the manufacturer's stamp, I drew a small square. Then I wrote my initials inside it. I also placed a thin strip of clear tape across the paperback's back cover. I scratched a tiny line into the tape with the point of a key. The marks were unnecessary. I had not lost either object. No one had replaced them. They were still in my apartment. I told myself the marks would let me stop thinking about it. For 6 days, nothing happened. My routine remained ordinary. I worked. I bought groceries. I finished a paperback and started another. I used the blue mug each morning because avoiding it felt more irrational than using it. By the end of the week, the paper recycling bag beside my kitchen bin was full. I considered waiting another few days. Then I realized I had begun treating the recycling room as if it were capable of noticing my absence. That thought bothered me enough that I went down. The room was empty. One fluorescent tube flickered near the door. Its light was colder than the others and made the blue carts look grey. The garbage bins were closed. I dropped my kitchen bag into the garbage. When I lifted the lid of the paper cart, another black bag was waiting on top. This one had been tied neatly. A small tear had been made near the knot, as if someone wanted the contents to be seen. At the top was an empty coffee bag. I had opened one just like it that morning. Below it was a flattened cereal box, 3 envelopes, a takeout container, an empty dish soap bottle, and the same paperback I had finished 2 nights earlier. I opened the bag. The paperback had a strip of clear tape on its back cover. A tiny line had been scratched into the tape. I took out the coffee bag. At home, the bag I had opened that morning was folded shut with a clip. It was still half full. The one in my hand was empty. Coffee dust had collected in the bottom corners. The roasted smell was fresh enough to rise above the damp cardboard and disinfectant. I checked the cereal box. Upstairs, the same box was still in my kitchen cupboard. There was enough cereal left for several breakfasts. The box in the recycling room had been opened along the same uneven tier. I always opened the inner bag badly. I pulled too hard near one corner, leaving a narrow strip of plastic attached. This bag had the same strip. I found an envelope with my name and apartment number fully visible. It was a utility statement I had received the previous afternoon. I had placed the original in a drawer because the balance looked higher than expected. I had not thrown it away. The statement in the bag showed the same amount. It also had a coffee ring on the lower corner. I went upstairs and opened the drawer. My copy was there. There was no coffee ring. I took both the mug and the utility statement to the management office later that day. I left out the parts that sounded impossible. I said someone had been going through discarded mail and placing items with my name into the wrong recycling cart. That was a reasonable privacy concern. The property manager treated it as one. She was polite and attentive. She asked whether I had seen anyone in the room. I said no. She asked whether anything had been taken from my apartment. I said no. The building had a camera near the elevator, but not inside the recycling room. The manager explained that the room itself was not monitored because residents sometimes discarded personal documents. The hallway camera only showed people entering the common area, not what they carried into the room. I asked whether anyone had reported a similar problem. She checked her notes and shook her head. Then she sent another building-wide reminder about breaking down cardboard, tying garbage bags, and removing personal information from mail. The notice made everything seem smaller. A routine building problem, an inconvenience, something solved by a polite email and a paper shredder. That evening, I shredded every envelope before putting it into recycling. I cleaned labels from containers. I tore receipts into narrow strips. I stopped using the blue mug and placed it in the back of a high cabinet. The following week, I changed my schedule. Instead of going down after dinner, I went early in the morning. The hallway lights were still dimmed. The building was quiet except for the ventilation system and the slow movement of the elevator cables. The recycling room floor had just been mopped. The disinfectant smell was so sharp that I could taste it. There was no black bag in the paper cart. For a moment, I felt relieved. Then I opened the glass and container cart. The bag was inside. It had been pushed beneath several empty bottles. The top layer contained shredded paper. I recognized the narrow strips. One piece showed half of my name. Another showed the edge of the utility company's logo. A third had the exact blue line that ran across the top of my statement. The bag also contained a new toothbrush wrapper. I had replaced my toothbrush the night before. The wrapper from my apartment was still in my kitchen trash. There was an empty container from the dinner I had ordered 2 days earlier. The restaurant had packed the food in a white paper bowl with a clear plastic lid. On the lid, the person who prepared it had written my order in black marker. The handwriting matched the container in my apartment trash. Beneath it was a coffee cup with a cardboard sleeve. My name was written on the side. It was spelled incorrectly in the same way as the cup I had bought that morning. I was still holding the original cup. It sat on top of the blue cart while I searched the bag. The coffee inside it was warm. The cup in the bag was empty and cold. I placed them beside each other. The same shortened name. The same misspelling. The same small black mark near the rim where the marker had slipped. The discarded cup had a faint crease near the bottom. I pressed the cup I was holding in the same place. The paper bent along an identical line. I left both cups in the room. By the time I reached the elevator, I regretted leaving mine behind. Not because I wanted the coffee, but because I could no longer remember which cup I had carried downstairs. I went back. Both cups were still on the cart. One was warm. I took the warm one. For the rest of the day, I could smell the recycling room on my hands. It was probably imagined. I washed them several times. The sour trace of wet cardboard remained beneath the soap. I began writing down what I used. The list was not detailed at first. Coffee, toothpaste, mail, takeout, cereal. Then I added times. Opened coffee at 7,001. Finished cereal at 7024. Collected mail at 689. Opened package at 6,031. I kept the notebook on the kitchen counter. Each time I threw something away, I noted it. Each time I took something from a package, I wrote that down too. The routine made me feel more stable. My life became a set of small, confirmed actions. A can was empty when I placed it in the recycling bag. An envelope was opened when I wrote down the time. A box remained half full when I closed the cupboard. Nothing could happen earlier than the moment I recorded it. The next bag proved otherwise. It appeared 3 days later. I had not taken any trash downstairs. I went only to check. The bag was standing upright beside the recycling carts, as though it had been placed there for me. Inside was an empty can of sparkling water. The same flavor was in my refrigerator. I had not opened it yet. There was also an empty cardboard box from a delivery I was expecting the following day. The shipping label showed my name and apartment number. The tracking number matched the confirmation email on my phone. The box had been opened. The packing tape was cut cleanly along the center seam. Inside was the molded paper insert that should have held the desk lamp I had ordered. The insert was empty. The bag also contained a receipt from the grocery store. The date printed at the top was the next day. I had written a grocery list that morning. The receipt showed every item on it: coffee, soap, bread, paper towels, cereal. The total was slightly higher than I expected. At the bottom were the same 4 card digits. I folded the receipt and put it into my pocket. I left the rest where it was. The following evening I went grocery shopping. I considered buying different items. I walked through the store with my basket and chose another brand of coffee. I picked a different loaf of bread. I skipped the cereal entirely. At checkout, the total did not match the receipt. I felt a small, almost childish relief. Then the cashier noticed that one of the items had been scanned twice. She corrected it. The new total matched exactly. I paid with a different card. The last 4 digits on the receipt still matched the one from the recycling room. Not the card I had used, the card I usually used. I stood near the exit comparing the 2 slips beneath the bright store lights. The items were different. The total was the same. The date was the same. The payment digits should not have been. I threw both receipts into a public trash can before going home. The next morning, both were inside the black bag in the recycling room. They lay side by side. One showed the card I had used, the other showed the card I had not. After that, I stopped keeping a list. The notes did not help. They only gave the other version of my life a schedule to follow. I tried speaking to other residents. There was an older man on my floor who took flattened cardboard down every few days. He said he had never noticed a black bag in the recycling carts. He complained about people leaving boxes without breaking them down, then apologized for getting carried away. A woman from the floor below said the room always smelled terrible, and she spent as little time there as possible. A man I often saw near the mailboxes said he used the trash chute and took recycling to a public depot because the building carts were usually full. None of them recognized the bag. One evening, I waited in the hallway across from the recycling room. I brought a book and sat on a bench near the elevator. The hallway camera would record me sitting there, though it would not show the room's interior. For almost 3 hours, residents came and went. They carried paper bags, boxes, and tied garbage. The heavy metal door opened and closed. Each time, the door seal released a brief breath of damp cardboard and disinfectant into the hallway. Nobody carried a black bag like the one I had been finding. Near midnight, the hallway became quiet. I opened the recycling room. There was no bag. I returned to the bench. A few minutes later, The elevator opened on an empty car. The doors waited, then closed. I watched the recycling room door. Nothing moved. At some point, I looked down at my book. I read less than a page. When I looked up again, a thin shadow showed beneath the metal door. Something was resting against it from the inside. I had not seen anyone enter. I opened the door. A full black bag stood on the floor. The plastic was lightly misted with condensation, as if it had been carried from a colder place. The knot at the top was tight. Beneath it was a small loop of blue tape. I used the same blue tape to mark freezer containers. I stood in the doorway without touching the bag. The room's fluorescent hum seemed lower than before. The light nearest the back wall flickered at slow, uneven intervals. I could have called the property manager. I could have gone upstairs. I could have left the bag unopened. Instead, I closed the door behind me. The plastic felt cold beneath my fingers. Inside were the remains of the evening I had just spent in the hallway. A paper coffee cup from the lobby machine, the wrapper from the sandwich I had eaten, a folded sheet from the notebook I had brought with me, a used paper napkin with a blue ink mark where my pen had leaked. My actual coffee cup sat on the bench outside. The sandwich wrapper was in the small trash can beside it. The notebook was still under my arm. I checked its pages. None had been removed. In the black bag, the duplicate sheet contained handwriting. My handwriting. It was a list of the people who had entered the room that evening. Each description matched the notes I had made. Gray sweatshirt, 2 boxes, green coat, glass bottles, work clothes, white kitchen bag. At the bottom was one final line. Waited until 12,017. I checked my phone. It was 12,016. The minute changed while I watched. I left the room. The hallway was empty. My coffee cup and sandwich wrapper remained where I had left them. I gathered everything and went upstairs. I did not sleep. The next day, I asked management whether anyone had entered the room after midnight. The property manager checked the hallway log. She said the last recorded entry had been me. I asked whether the recycling room had another door. She looked confused. There was a locked service panel behind the carts, but it only provided access to pipes. It was not large enough for a person to use. She offered to have maintenance inspect the room. I thanked her. That afternoon, a maintenance worker checked the lock, the hinges, the ceiling panels, and the service access. He found nothing unusual. The following morning, a typed notice appeared on the recycling room door. Please do not open or sort through other residents' garbage. It was reasonable. It was also addressed to me. For 2 weeks, I avoided the room. I carried my garbage to an outdoor collection bin several blocks away. I took recycling to a public drop-off point. I did not use the building's trash chute. The apartment began to feel separate from the building. I stored clean recycling in sealed containers. I removed labels. I stopped ordering takeout. I bought only what I needed and paid in cash when possible. The black bags did not appear anywhere else. My life became smaller, but it remained mine. Then things inside the apartment began to look used too soon. A paper towel roll became empty sooner than expected. A new soap dispenser felt lighter after one day. The loaf of bread lost 2 slices I did not remember eating. None of it was proof. Daily life is full of small disappearances. A spoon goes missing. A carton empties. A book falls open to a page you do not remember reaching. Normally we accept those gaps. Ignorance is comfortable when nothing asks to be counted. I began counting everything. 6 cans in the refrigerator. 9 coffee filters. 4 clean towels. 23 pages left in the book. The numbers changed only when I used something. At least that was what I believed. One morning, I woke and found 5 cans in the refrigerator. The empty 6th can was waiting outside my apartment door. It had been rinsed clean. A blue strip of tape circled the top. I took it downstairs. The recycling room door was propped open with a rubber wedge. Someone had just cleaned the floor. A thin layer of water reflected the ceiling lights. There was no black bag. Instead, several familiar objects had been arranged inside the empty paper cart, the coffee bag from my cupboard, the soap dispenser from my bathroom, the book from my nightstand, the blue mug from the high kitchen cabinet. All of them were empty, finished, or worn out. I ran upstairs. My copies remained in place. The coffee bag was half full. The soap dispenser was nearly new. The book still had 23 pages left. The mug sat in the back of the cabinet. The small square I had drawn beneath it was intact. I carried it into the light. The duplicate mug downstairs had the same square. My initials were inside it. The handwriting was mine. I placed my mug on the kitchen table and sat beside it. The other version of my life was no longer merely ahead of me. It was finishing things. Coffee, soap, books, food. It used them, emptied them, and sent the remains into my building. I did not know whether it was copying my choices or making them first. That difference became harder to understand each day. If I reached for the blue mug because I wanted it, had the other version already reached for its own? If I opened a book, was I choosing the page or arriving where it had already been? The more I tried to separate us, the more artificial my decisions became. I drank water from a bowl one morning simply because I could not imagine anyone choosing to do that. The following day, a matching bowl appeared in the recycling room. It was dry. A faint water line circled the inside. I stopped trying to surprise it. I also stopped throwing things away. Garbage accumulated beneath the kitchen sink. Cardboard gathered near the wall. Empty jars lined the counter. The apartment took on the stale smell of packaging and old paper. It did not stop the bags. They appeared every few days now. Each contained things I still owned, not similar things. Mine, a pen with the same bite marks on its cap, a sock with the same loose thread at the ankle, a jar with the same flaw in the glass, a key ring with a shallow scratch beside the clasp. The items upstairs did not disappear. They gained twins, used twins, discarded twins. The other apartment, wherever it was, seemed identical to mine in every detail except one. It was becoming empty. The final evening began with an ordinary decision. I made coffee in the blue mug. I had avoided it for weeks, but I was tired of allowing an object to frighten me. I stood at the kitchen counter while steam rose into the yellow light, the chip beneath the handle pressed against my finger. I drank half the coffee. Then I tied one of the garbage bags beneath the sink and decided to take it downstairs. I brought the mug with me. It was a test, though I did not say that aloud. I wanted one object to remain in my hand from the apartment to the recycling room. I wanted no uncertain moment. No open cabinet. No unattended table. The mug would not leave my sight. The elevator descended slowly. The garbage bag brushed against my leg. Warm coffee moved inside the mug with each small shift of the car. When the doors opened, the hallway was empty. The recycling room door was closed. A strip of light showed beneath it. I entered. The air was colder than the hallway. The carts had been emptied. Their lids stood open. Flattened cardboard had been stacked neatly against the wall. The concrete floor was dry. One black bag sat in the center of the room. It was the largest one I had seen. The plastic had been pulled tight around objects with straight edges. The knot at the top was wrapped in blue tape. I set my kitchen garbage near the bin. I kept the mug in my right hand. With my left, I loosened the tape and opened the bag. At the top was a blue ceramic mug. Coffee had dried inside it. There was a crescent-shaped chip beneath the handle. A small square was drawn on the bottom with my initials inside. I looked at the mug in my hand. It was still warm. Below the duplicate were the remains of my apartment. empty coffee bags, finished books, bare rolls of tape, used pens, clean jars, worn towels folded into compact squares, envelopes bearing my name, packaging from things I had not finished using. Everything had been cleaned. Even the garbage was orderly. There were no food scraps, no spills, no loose paper. It looked less like household waste than an inventory of a life after the life had been removed. A sheet of white paper lay across the top. It was held down by the duplicate mug. I lifted it. The paper was torn from the notebook on my kitchen counter. The faint blue lines were the same. The top edge carried the same rough fibers left by the metal binding. The message was written in black ink. I recognized the pressure of the pen. I recognized the narrow spaces between words, and the way the final letters leaned slightly downward. It was my handwriting. I've cleared everything out over here. It's your turn. I read it beneath the fluorescent light while the warm mug remained in my hand and the cold one waited inside the bag. I was still holding mine, but I no longer knew which of us had used it first. The log between shifts. The first entry I found in my handwriting was written 6 minutes after I had left the building. It described a light going out in the service corridor. It also said that nobody had been standing beneath it, which was an odd detail to record when nobody was supposed to be there at all. I worked the overnight security desk in a 12-story office building. The job was quiet. That was why I had taken it. My shift began at 11 at night and ended at 7 in the morning. By the time I arrived, most of the offices were dark. A few cleaning staff remained on the upper floors. Sometimes an employee worked late behind a glass conference room wall. By midnight, the building usually belonged to the ventilation system, the elevators, and me. The security desk stood at one side of the lobby. There was a curved counter made of dark laminate. Behind it were 6 security monitors, a phone, a radio charger, a key cabinet, and a digital clock with red numbers. A narrow drawer held spare access cards, flashlights, and forms for incidents nobody wanted to imagine happening. The shift log sat beside the phone. It was a thick, black-covered notebook with numbered pages. Every guard recorded the ordinary events of the shift. Deliveries, patrols, maintenance calls, doors found unlocked, lights left on, visitors arriving after hours. The entries were brief. 23,002. Cleaning crew departed through loading entrance. 0015 team. Completed lobby and parking level patrol. No issues. 02040. Alarm panel briefly showed fault on level 8. Reset successful. At the end of each shift, the guard wrote the time, signed beneath the final entry, and passed the book to the next person. It was not an official legal record, but everyone treated it carefully. If something happened, the supervisor checked the log first. I had worked nights long enough to recognize everyone's handwriting. Lena, who worked evenings, wrote in small blue letters that leaned forward. Marcus, the morning guard, pressed so hard that his writing marked the next 2 pages. Our supervisor, Neil, printed in block capitals and underlined every time. Mine was narrow and plain. I used black ink. My lowercase letters were upright. I left too much space after periods. The tail of my Y curved back beneath the word. The first strange entry appeared between my sign-out and Marcus's sign-in. I had finished my final patrol at 6038 that morning. At 6049, I wrote that all exterior doors were secure. I signed out at 6052. Marcus arrived a little late and signed in at 7005. Between our entries was one line, 06588. Light above service corridor door switched off. Corridor remained unoccupied. The sentence was written in my handwriting. Beneath it were my initials. I noticed it the following night. Lena had gone home, and I was sitting behind the desk with a fresh cup of coffee. I opened the book to review the previous shift. The lobby was quiet. Rain tapped softly against the tall front windows. I read the entry twice. The service corridor was behind the lobby. It connected the loading entrance, storage rooms, and utility spaces. The light above its door stayed on at all hours. I had never seen it switch off. More importantly, I had already left at 65T2. The employee entrance recorded my access card at 6553. I remembered walking to the parking area while the sky began to turn grey. I remembered looking back at the building because I had forgotten whether I had packed my phone charger. At 6058 I had been outside. I checked the previous page to compare the handwriting. The letters were mine. The spacing was mine. Even the curved tail beneath unoccupied resembled the way I formed it when writing quickly. I asked Marcus about it the next morning. He was an ordinary, patient man who treated the quiet shifts as a chance to read. He arrived carrying a travel mug and a folded newspaper. "Did you add this?" I asked. He leaned over the book. "No. You didn't see the corridor light go out? I wasn't here yet." "I know. That's why I'm asking." He looked at me, then back at the page. "I figured you wrote it before you left. The time says 6:58. You could have written the wrong time. That was reasonable. Night work does strange things to hours. Near the end of a shift, the final 20 minutes can feel both brief and endless. I had written the wrong date before. I had repeated entries. Once, I had signed a page using the previous month. I said I must have made a mistake. Marcus signed in beneath the line. For the next several nights, the log remained normal. I made my patrols. I checked doors. I watched empty elevators open at floors requested by the cleaning crew. I drank coffee that always cooled before I finished it. At night, the building had layers of sound. The ventilation system produced a low current of air beneath everything else. Pipes clicked inside walls. Elevator cables moved above the ceiling. The fluorescent lights behind the security desk made a thin, steady hum. The wall clock did not tick, but a smaller battery clock inside the key cabinet did. I could hear it whenever the lobby became still. There was comfort in those sounds. They meant the building was operating. Machines were moving air, measuring time, and maintaining temperatures. Nothing was truly silent. The second entry appeared 4 nights later. I had signed out at 6:55. Marcus signed in at 7002. Between the two was another line in my handwriting. 06059. West elevator opened at lobby. Car empty. Door remained open for 11 seconds. I had not written it. I was certain this time. The west elevator had been out of service for routine maintenance. A sign was taped across its call button. The power remained on, but the car had been parked on the 8th floor. I showed Marcus. He pressed his thumb against the paper and rubbed gently, as if checking whether the ink might come away. "It looks like you're writing," he said. "I know. Maybe Lena wrote it? She left 8 hours earlier. Her handwriting doesn't look like this." "I know that too." He gave a tired smile. "Then you wrote it." I did not argue. There was no useful answer hidden inside a longer conversation. That night, I checked the west elevator. The maintenance sign was still in place. The floor display showed 8. I returned to the desk and recorded the time. 23,041. West elevator remains out of service on level 8. I drew a small star beside the entry. Before signing out the next morning, I photographed the page. There was no additional line. I closed the book and placed it beside the phone. Marcus had not arrived yet, so I waited. At 7001, he entered through the employee doors. He set his coffee on the desk and removed his coat. I handed him the book. The extra entry was already there. It appeared directly beneath my signature. 06058. Officer waited for relief instead of leaving. Watched West elevator display for 43 seconds. I looked at the elevator. The display still showed 8. Marcus looked from the page to me. Did you write this just now? No. You've been sitting here the whole time. Yes. Then who else touched the book? No one. The handwriting was mine. The star I had drawn beside the earlier elevator entry had been copied beside the new one. Marcus stopped smiling. He turned the page over and held it toward the lobby lights. The ink looked ordinary. It did not shine or bleed. There was no pressure mark beneath it. He asked whether I'd been getting enough sleep. I told him I had. That was not entirely true. I slept during the day, but daylight sleep never felt complete. Even with curtains closed, the room seemed aware that morning existed outside it. Delivery trucks moved along the street. Doors opened in nearby apartments. Pipes carried other people's showers through the walls. Still, I was not confused about the log. I knew what I had written. I also knew what I had not. Our supervisor arrived just after 8. Marcus showed him the page after I left. Neil called me that afternoon. His voice was careful. He asked if anything at work had been bothering me. I said no. He asked whether I had written the entries as a joke. I said I had not. Then he asked whether I might have written them and forgotten. I said that was possible because it was the answer he wanted. Neil reminded me that log entries needed to be clear and factual. He told me not to describe my own behavior in the third person. I agreed. Before ending the call, he said something that stayed with me. The writing does look exactly like yours. The next night, the logbook had been moved. It usually sat to the right of the desk phone. Neil had placed it inside the top drawer and locked the drawer with a small brass key. The key was signed out to Lena. She handed it to me during our shift change. Neil wants the book locked up when nobody's at the desk, she said. She tried to make the instructions sound routine. I asked if she had read the entries. Marcus showed me. What do you think? I think nights are long. That isn't an answer. She looked past me toward the dark lobby. No, she said. It isn't. Lena signed out at 11. I locked the logbook in the drawer and kept the key in my shirt pocket. During the shift, I removed the book only when I needed to make an entry. After each one, I returned it to the drawer. At 12,012, I recorded that the last cleaning worker had left. At 1,000, I completed the first patrol. At 2,035, I responded to a door alarm on the 4th floor. The door was secure. The alarm had cleared by the time I arrived. At 3,001, I made coffee. At 4,030, I completed the parking level patrol. At 6:42, I checked the exterior doors. Nothing unusual happened. Marcus arrived at 6:59. I unlocked the drawer and removed the book. An unfamiliar entry appeared between my 3001 coffee note and the 4003 patrol. 03,117. Officer drank from cup, noticed coffee had gone cold, reheated it for 40 seconds. I had done exactly that. The break room microwave had a button that added 40 seconds. I remembered standing beneath its small yellow light while the coffee rotated behind the dark glass. I had not written it down. There had been no reason to write it down. The second line followed. Ural 321 part. Officer returned to desk and checked locked drawer without opening it. I had done that too. I touched my shirt pocket to confirm the key was still there. Then I had pulled the drawer handle once. The entry was written with the same black pen I kept clipped to the logbook. The book had been locked away. The key had remained in my pocket. Marcus read the lines silently. Then he asked, "Were you alone?" "As far as I know." "That's not what I asked." I looked at the monitors. The lobby camera showed us standing side by side behind the desk. The other screens showed empty corridors, closed doors, and motionless parking spaces. "Yes," I said. I was alone. Neil changed the procedure again. The logbook was placed in a clear document box with a numbered plastic seal. Each guard signed for the seal at the start and end of the shift. If the box was opened, the seal had to be broken. It made the simple notebook look like evidence from an investigation nobody wanted to conduct. For 3 shifts, no strange writing appeared. The seal numbers matched. The pages remained unchanged. I began to feel embarrassed. The clear box sat beside me for 8 hours at a time. The logbook inside looked harmless. Its black cover gathered fingerprints beneath the plastic. I continued making entries on a separate sheet. At the end of each shift, Marcus watched while I broke the seal, transferred my notes into the book, and applied a new one. The system worked until the 4th morning. Marcus arrived early. We stood together while I checked the seal number. It matched the form. The plastic strip was unbroken. I cut it with scissors and lifted the lid. The logbook was open to a new page. 4 entries had been written during the night. 000000000. Officer looked at document box for the 7th time. 00cc. Officer heard movement above suspended ceiling. Did not report it. COCO6. Officer considered leaving desk light on during patrol. 000000000 while awake. I read the last line again. What does that mean? Marcus asked. I don't know. But I remembered 411. I had been seated behind the desk. The lobby monitors cast pale blue light across the counter. For several seconds, I'd imagined the entire building from above, not as a picture, as a physical awareness. 12 dark floors stacked over me. Hundreds of empty rooms, miles of wire in the walls, air moving through metal ducts, desks waiting beneath silent lights. The thought had arrived so clearly that I had felt the weight of the building above my head. Then it passed. I had not been asleep. I had not told anyone. The log had recorded it. Marcus lowered his voice, though we were alone. Did you hear something in the ceiling? Yes. What? Probably a vent damper. Why didn't you report it? Because vent dampers make noise. He nodded slowly. The explanation was sensible. The entry was not. Neil took the logbook away that afternoon. He replaced it with a new one. The replacement had a green cover instead of black. It was smaller and contained only lined pages. Neil wrote the building name and start date on the front. He also issued new pens. Each shift received a different color. Lena used blue. I used red. Marcus used green. Neil said this would make it clear who wrote each entry. He did not say what he expected to happen. The first 3 nights remained normal. The green logbook felt unfamiliar beneath my hand. The pages were thinner. My red ink showed faintly through to the other side. I wrote only what was necessary. I stopped recording coffee breaks. I stopped noting harmless sounds. I reduced every entry to time, location, and outcome. The other entries changed with me. They began appearing in red ink. The first was written at the bottom of a page after my final patrol. For 5043, officer shortened entries to avoid providing useful details. The handwriting was mine. The second appeared the following night. 0218. Officer turned radio volume higher because silence felt occupied. That was true. At 2:18, the lobby had become unusually still. The ventilation system had stopped for a scheduled temperature cycle. The fluorescent hum seemed to fade at the same time. Even the clock inside the key cabinet had gone quiet, though I knew it could not have. I turned the radio louder. No one spoke through it. A faint current of static filled the room. I had felt better until I found the entry. After that, the log began recording details while they happened. At 12,026, I returned from checking the loading entrance. The book contained a new line. 12,025. Officer entered lobby and wiped rain from left sleeve. My sleeve was still wet. At 1004, I poured water from the cooler. When I sat down, another line had appeared. 1004. Officer filled paper cup halfway, then added more. I was still holding the cup. At 1051, I looked up from the monitors and found this. 1005. Officer read the same paragraph 3 times, without understanding it. The paperback beside me was open to the paragraph. The entries no longer waited for the gap between shifts. They did not require an empty desk. They appeared while the logbook rested within reach. I never saw the ink form. I could watch the page for several minutes. Nothing changed. Then I would glance toward a monitor or check the clock. When I looked back, another sentence would be there. The writing was always dry. I placed a blank sheet of paper over the open page. A line appeared beneath it. I closed the book and wrapped an elastic band around the cover. The next entry appeared on the following page. I placed the book inside the locked key cabinet. The next entry was waiting when I opened it. I began carrying the book during patrols. It felt childish, but leaving it alone felt worse. I held it beneath one arm as I walked the empty floors. The red pen remained in my pocket. At night, offices look unfinished. Computer screens become black squares. Desk chairs face uncertain directions. Glass walls reflect emergency lighting. Personal objects left on desks lose their ordinary meaning. A mug becomes a dark cylinder. A coat hanging behind a door becomes a person until you remember it is cloth. On the 7th floor, the carpet muffled my steps so completely that I could hear the paper moving inside the logbook. It was a soft sound, a page settling. Nothing more. I stopped near the conference rooms. The book was still closed. I continued my patrol. Back at the desk, a new entry waited. 02037. Officer heard the page move while standing outside conference room 7B. Below it was another sentence. He did not open the book because he was afraid the record would be ahead of him. I closed the cover. The word afraid bothered me. Security logs did not record feelings. They did not interpret. They documented events in plain language. The entries had used that same plain language until then. Now they had begun describing thoughts. The next night, they became more precise. 00114. Officer wondered whether Lena had read the latest entries. 0047. Officer decided not to call supervisor because he expected concern instead of belief. 01004. Officer pictured someone seated in the blind spot behind the key cabinet. There was no space behind the key cabinet for a person. It was mounted directly against the wall. I still moved my chair so I could see it more clearly. At 1022, another line appeared. Officer moved chair 7 inches to the left. I measured the distance with a ruler from the drawer. It was 7 inches. I stopped reporting the entries. Neil had already changed the book, the pens, and the storage procedure. There was nothing else he could reasonably change without removing me from the shift. I needed the job. More than that, I feared what would happen if another guard took my place. The entries used my handwriting. They described me. If I stopped coming, I did not know whether the writing would stop or whether it would begin describing whoever sat behind the desk instead. I told myself staying was responsible. That explanation lasted for several nights. The truer reason was that I wanted to know what the book would write next. Fear does not always make people retreat. Sometimes it makes the unknown feel like a door that must be opened, even when every instinct says the room beyond it was never meant to be entered. The logbook became the center of each shift. I watched it while pretending not to. I placed my coffee near it. I angled my chair toward it. During patrols, I carried it against my ribs and felt the hard edge of the cover through my uniform shirt. The entries continued. They described my movements. They described my pauses. They described moments so small I had never thought of them as actions. 2003, officer touched lower lip while reading. 2029, officer counted 4 dark monitors before remembering there were 6. 3000 and 3003, officer listened for elevator and heard nothing. Then the writing began using the future tense. 4008, officer will check east stairwell door twice. At 4008, I remained behind the desk. I watched the red clock change to 4009. Relief came slowly. The entry had been wrong. Then the fire panel gave a brief warning tone. The display indicated a door fault at the east stairwell. I walked there with the logbook under my arm. The door was secure. I checked it once. Before leaving, I checked it again. Back at the desk, the entry had changed. 4008, officer checked east stairwell door twice. The future tense was gone. The sentence looked as if it had always been written that way. I began disobeying the predictions. If the log said I would drink coffee, I poured it away. If it said I would patrol the parking level, I stayed in the lobby. If it said I would answer the phone, I let it ring. The entries adjusted. 01033. Officer refused coffee because it had been recorded. O2 Falls 1-2. Officer remained at desk, believing stillness was a choice. Joe Falls 0405. Officer allowed phone to ring 9 times. The book did not predict my behavior. It included my resistance. That was when I understood the small comfort I had lost. Before the logbook, I had believed that being alone meant being unobserved. I had confused an empty building with privacy. The two were not the same. Something could remain unseen and still know where I was. Something could be silent and still keep records. The oldest fear is not that darkness contains a visible threat. A visible thing has edges. It can be named, measured, and avoided. The deeper fear is that darkness may contain attention. The logbook gave that attention handwriting. My handwriting. One morning Marcus arrived and found me asleep at the desk. He touched my shoulder lightly. I woke with my hand resting on the open page. The book contained a single new sentence. 06054. Officer slept for 3 minutes and dreamed that the building was awake. Marcus read it. "What did you dream?" he asked. I looked at the empty lobby. "I don't remember. That was a lie. In the dream, every room in the building had contained a security desk. Each desk held the same green logbook. Each chair was empty. Pens moved across the pages without hands. The dream had not felt symbolic. It felt like a memory of a place too large to exist all at once. I took 2 nights off. Lena covered the first. A temporary guard covered the second. When I returned, I opened the logbook. The entries were normal. Blue ink from Lena. Black ink from the temporary guard. Deliveries, patrols, a faulty door sensor. There was no red writing. Nothing described them. I turned back to the final page from my previous shift. A sentence had been added beneath my sign-out. 00659. Officer left for 2 nights. Observation paused. The last 2 words had been underlined. I did not tell anyone. My shift began normally. Lena handed me the radio. She said the 4th floor cleaning crew would stay late. She mentioned a scheduled maintenance visit near midnight. Then she hesitated. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine. You always say that." She put on her coat. Before leaving, she touched the green logbook with 2 fingers. "Does it still write about you?" I looked at her. She did not wait for an answer. The lobby doors closed behind her. At midnight, the maintenance worker arrived, checked the ventilation controls, and left. At 12:40, the final cleaner signed out. After that, the building became quiet. The ventilation system settled into its low nighttime rhythm. The monitors showed empty halls. Red numbers advanced on the digital clock. No new writing appeared. 1 hour passed, then another. At 2030, I completed a patrol with the book under my arm. At 2005 too, I made coffee. At 3006, I checked the loading entrance. The pages remained blank. The absence of writing did not reassure me. It felt like a conversation that had stopped because the other person was waiting for me to say something. At 3001 too, I opened the logbook to the latest page. The paper smelled faintly of dust and red ink. I ran my finger along the blank lines. At the bottom of the page, a sentence had appeared. 03018. Officer opened the logbook and began reading the final entry. I checked the clock. It was 3003. The line below it continued. 0318. He checked the clock twice. I looked at the clock again. Still 3013. Another sentence followed. 03018. He placed his left hand on the page to confirm the paper was real. My left hand was resting on the desk. I moved it away from the book. The next line read, Euro 318. He moved his hand away. The ink was dry. My coffee cooled beside me. The monitors showed empty rooms, long corridors, and closed elevator doors. Nothing in the building moved. I turned the page. There was more writing. 0349. He turned the page, although he already knew the record would continue. The clock changed to 3014. Below that, the entry described the light above the service corridor. It said the light would switch off at 3006. I looked toward the corridor door. The light remained on. The next sentence said I would listen for the ventilation system and realize it had stopped. I listened. The low current of air beneath the room had disappeared. The building had become completely still. The small clock inside the key cabinet continued ticking. 1 slow second at a time. The logbook contained one final line. The timestamp beside it was 3018. The handwriting was mine. He finally turned to this page. The clock changed to 3:15. I had 3 minutes left to catch up with what had already seen me. Six, the household count. I wrote 1 in the box marked total number of people living at this address. 2 weeks later, the form came back with the number crossed out in red. A printed note had been attached to the front. Please provide complete and accurate information. Our records indicate 2 usual residents at this address. I lived alone. I had lived alone for nearly 4 years. The apartment was not large enough to misunderstand. It had 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a narrow kitchen, and a living room that also served as my dining room and office. There were no locked rooms, no attic, no storage space beyond 2 closets and a cabinet above the refrigerator. If another person lived there, we would have had to take turns standing up. The original questionnaire had arrived in my mailbox with the usual collection of bills, store flyers, and advertisements. The envelope was thick and official looking. My address appeared through a clear plastic window. A line above it stated that a response was required for the household. Inside were several folded pages and an instruction sheet. The paper was smooth and slightly heavier than normal printer paper. Small grey boxes divided each page into sections. The questions were ordinary. Did I own or rent the home? How many people usually lived or stayed there? Were there any additional residents not listed elsewhere? The instructions asked me to include roommates, partners, relatives, and anyone who stayed at the address most of the time. None of those applied. I rented the apartment. I lived alone. Nobody stayed with me. I filled out the form at my dining table with a black ballpoint pen. The kitchen light buzzed softly above me. Rain moved against the windows in thin, irregular lines. For the household count, I wrote 1. I completed the remaining questions, placed the pages in the return envelope, and dropped it into the outgoing mail slot the next morning. then I forgot about it. Official forms are designed to be forgotten once completed. Their language is dry. Their boxes are small. They ask people to reduce their lives into numbers that fit inside printed lines. I did not expect the form to come back. The red correction looked handwritten at first, but when I touched it, the ink felt completely flat. It had been printed onto the page. My one remained visible beneath it. A red 2 had been placed beside it. The attached note included a toll-free number and a reference code. I called during my lunch break. The woman who answered sounded tired but polite. I explained that I had received a request to correct the number of people in my apartment. She asked for the reference code, my name and my address. I heard a keyboard through the phone. Your response lists 1 occupant, she said. That's correct. Our address review indicates 2. What does that mean? It means the residence is associated with 2 usual residents. It shouldn't be. There was a pause. Are you sure there isn't anyone else who stays there most of the time? Yes. A roommate? No. A partner or other adult? No. Someone temporarily away who normally returns to the address? No. She asked me to wait. The hold music was a soft sequence of piano notes interrupted by recorded reminders about completing household information accurately. When she returned, her tone had become more careful. I can submit a correction, she said. You'll receive a revised questionnaire. How was the second person verified? I don't have access to that detail. Is there a name? I only see the household count. I asked whether the extra person could have been a previous tenant. She said the survey was intended to record current residence, not ownership history. Then she repeated that a revised form would be sent. It arrived 5 days later. The new questionnaire looked identical to the first, except for a line printed near the top. See your verified household count, 2. I crossed out the number and wrote 1. In the section requesting details for each household member, I completed the first column with my own information. I drew a line through the second column and wrote, no second resident. I mailed it back. 3 days later, I noticed the first small sign that someone else might have been using the apartment. It was a towel. I kept 2 bath towels on a rack behind the bathroom door. One was dark grey. The other was light grey. I used the dark one and left the other folded. That morning, both towels were damp. Not wet, not recently used. They held the cool, heavy dampness of fabric that had dried for several hours in a room without enough ventilation. I touched the light towel and smelled it. It smelled like my soap. I checked the bathroom floor. It was dry. The shower walls were dry. The sink held no water. The bath mat was in its usual place. I could have used the wrong towel. There was no reason I would remember which shade of grey I had reached for while half awake. I hung both towels apart and went to work. That evening, the light towel was dry. The dark one was damp. I stopped and looked at them for a while. The apartment was silent behind me. The refrigerator motor started in the kitchen. A pipe moved softly inside the wall. Someone in the apartment above crossed a room with slow, heavy steps. Those sounds belonged to the building. The towels belonged to me. I changed them both. The second correction notice arrived that week. This time, the envelope contained no full questionnaire. There was only a single page with my address, reference code, and household count. Your submitted response could not be accepted because it conflicts with verified occupancy information. Below that, in a shaded box, was the new number. Verified household count, 3. I read it at the mailbox. Then I checked the apartment number on the envelope. It was mine. I brought the page upstairs and placed it beside the first correction. The original form said 1. The first reply said 2. The second reply said 3. Each time I insisted that I lived alone, another resident appeared in the count. I called the number again. A different representative answered. I explained everything from the beginning. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked whether the apartment was part of a shared housing arrangement. No. Does the address include more than one unit? No. Is there a separate entrance? No. Do you receive mail for anyone else? Not usually. The word usually made her pause. A few letters for former tenants had arrived during my first year in the apartment. I had marked them as no longer living there and returned them. Recently, however, I had received 2 envelopes with my own name printed twice. One had been addressed to my name, my address. I had assumed it was a formatting error. I mentioned it. The representative asked whether both names were spelled exactly the same. Yes. Are there 2 people at the address with the same name? No. Another pause. The keyboard continued clicking. Our system shows 3 individual household responses associated with this address, she said. That's impossible. I've submitted 2. I'm seeing 3. What does the third one say? I'm not permitted to disclose another respondent's information. It's my address. I understand. And my name? I can't confirm that. I sat at my desk and looked toward the front door. The chain was in place. The deadbolt was locked. When was the third form submitted? I asked. I'm sorry. I can't provide that. She suggested requesting an in-person verification. A field representative could visit the apartment, confirm the household count, and correct the record. I agreed. The appointment was scheduled for the following week. Until then, I paid closer attention to the apartment. Living alone creates habits that are difficult to notice until they change. I knew how long a roll of paper towels lasted. I knew how many cups I used in a day. I knew where I left the television remote and which kitchen chair I pulled away from the table. Small objects began moving. The remote appeared on the opposite end of the couch. A dining chair was pushed in after I remembered leaving it out. The hallway light was on when I came home twice that week. Nothing valuable disappeared. The changes were too small to report and too consistent to ignore. One morning, I found 2 coffee cups in the sink. They were both mine. They belonged to the same set. One held the dried ring from the coffee I had made before work the previous day. The other held a smaller ring. I could not remember using it. I washed both and placed them in the cabinet. That evening, 3 cups were in the sink. I stood in the kitchen doorway without moving. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee. 1 cup was still warm. I checked the front door. It remained locked. The windows were closed. I opened every closet. My coats hung in the hallway closet. A vacuum cleaner leaned behind them. The bedroom closet held clothes, storage boxes, and an ironing board. Nobody was there. I checked beneath the bed, though there was not enough clearance for an adult to hide comfortably. The space was empty. When I returned to the kitchen, the warm cup had cooled. I washed all 3. After that, I used only 1 cup. I placed a strip of blue tape around the handle so I could identify it. When I finished coffee, I washed it, dried it, and placed it upside down on the same spot beside the sink. The other cups remained in the cabinet. For 2 mornings, the system worked. On the 3rd morning, the taped cup was already in the sink when I woke. It held fresh coffee grounds at the bottom. My coffee maker was warm. I had not turned it on. I opened the cabinet. Another cup sat upside down in the place where I usually left mine. It also had blue tape around the handle. The tape was cut to the same length, one edge folded over itself in the same uneven way. I removed both pieces of tape and threw them away. The field representative arrived in the afternoon. I knew who she was before opening the door because she wore an identification badge on a lanyard and carried a dark canvas bag filled with forms. She was an ordinary middle-aged woman with damp hair from the rain. Her manner was professional but not unfriendly. I checked her identification through the peephole, then opened the door. She remained in the hallway. Field representatives did not need to enter, she explained. We could complete the verification at the door. She asked for my name and confirmed the address. Then She looked at the tablet in her hand. How many people usually live or stay here? She asked. 1. She entered the answer. The tablet displayed something that made her stop. She tapped the screen twice. Is there anyone else home right now? No. Are you certain this is a single apartment? Yes. She looked past me. From the doorway, the living room, dining table, and part of the kitchen were visible. Nothing suggested multiple residents. There was one coat on the wall hook, one pair of shoes near the door. Her expression remained polite, but the pause became uncomfortable. Our current count for the address is 4, she said. It was 3 yesterday. She checked the screen again. It's 4 now. Why? I don't know. Can you see their names? Each response is restricted. Are there 4 separate responses? She did not answer immediately. Then she lowered her voice. There are 4 completed household records. All from this apartment? Yes. Do they all say 4 people live here? No. What did they say? She looked down the empty hallway before answering. They each report 1 occupant. The apartment seemed to contract around me. 4 separate forms. 4 people, each claiming to live alone. I asked whether the records used my name. She said she could not disclose that. Her refusal was procedural, not suspicious. That made it worse. Whatever the system had found, it had placed a privacy boundary between me and the other residents of my own home. The representative completed a manual correction. She showed me the screen before submitting it. Observed household count 1. I watched her press the button. A message appeared. She read it silently. What does it say? I asked. She turned the tablet slightly away. It says the observed count conflicts with active household records. I'm standing here. I know. You can see there's only 1 of me. Her eyes moved past my shoulder again. For a moment I thought she was looking at someone. I turned. The living room was empty. When I faced her again, she had stepped farther back into the hallway. I'm going to refer this for review, she said. She handed me a notice and left. The elevator arrived almost immediately. She entered without looking back. The notice was printed on pale yellow paper. Near the bottom, beside my address, someone had written 4 in blue ink. I closed the door. That evening, I checked my water bill. The usage had increased for 3 consecutive months. At first, the change was small. Then it nearly doubled. The most recent estimate suggested 4 adults lived in the apartment. The electric bill had also risen. I had blamed the heating system, my computer, and the old refrigerator. Now the pattern looked different. The increase followed the household count. 1 person, then 2, then 3, then 4. I called property management. The manager confirmed that I was the only person listed on the lease. No additional access cards had been issued. Maintenance had not entered without notice. She offered to change the locks. I agreed. A locksmith arrived the following morning. He replaced the cylinder and gave me 3 keys in a small sealed envelope. I kept one on my key ring. I locked the other 2 inside a desk drawer. The next day the envelope was open. 1 spare key was missing. There was no sign that the drawer had been forced. That night I heard movement in the living room. It began after 2 in the morning. I was awake in bed, reading beneath a small lamp. The building had settled into its quieter hours. The heating pipes clicked. Wind pressed softly against the bedroom window. Then a chair moved. The sound came from the dining area. Wood scraped across the floor for less than a second. I closed the book. A cabinet door opened in the kitchen. A cup touched the countertop. The sounds were gentle. Nobody was trying to hide them. I turned off the lamp and listened. Water ran briefly through the kitchen faucet. Then the coffee maker clicked. Its heating plate produced a soft electrical hum. Someone was preparing coffee in my apartment. I got out of bed. The bedroom door was open. Beyond it, the short hallway was dark. A line of yellow light showed beneath the kitchen cabinets. I walked toward it. The floor was cold beneath my feet. When I reached the living room, nobody was there. The coffee maker was on. 4 cups stood on the counter. Each contained coffee. Steam rose from all 4. I switched the machine off. I poured the coffee into the sink and watched the dark liquid circle the drain. The cups were identical. I did not sleep again. The next official envelope arrived 2 days later. Verified. Household count 5. I did not call. I filled out no correction. I placed the notice in a kitchen drawer with the others. The following morning, another envelope was waiting inside the drawer. It had not arrived by mail. There was no stamp or postal mark. My address was printed on the front. Inside was a blank household questionnaire. In the box for the number of residents, someone had written 1. The handwriting was mine. I compared it with the first form. The numbers matched. Both had the same narrow top and slightly angled base. I placed the new questionnaire beside the original. The paper looked identical. The fold lines were the same. Even the small gray printing flaw near the lower corner appeared on both copies. The only difference was pressure. The new one had been written more firmly. The pen had left a shallow mark on the page beneath it. I opened the rest of the drawers. 5 completed questionnaires were scattered through the apartment. 1 lay beneath the silverware tray. 1 was folded inside the book I'd been reading. 1 was behind the bathroom towels. Another rested beneath the mattress. The last was inside the sealed envelope that had originally held the spare keys. Every form listed 1 occupant. Every form was completed in my handwriting. Each described the same apartment. Each identified the person completing it as me. Some answers differed. 1 form said I had lived there for 4 years. Another said 3. 1 listed a move-in month I did not remember. 1 left the question blank. The signatures were all mine. I spread the forms across the dining table. The apartment was silent around me. 5 questionnaires. 5 versions of the same resident. Each believed the household count was 1. The official system did not appear to be adding people at random. It was counting responses. I was not the only person telling it that I lived alone. The next household notice listed 6 residents, then 7, then 8. The envelopes arrived closer together. Some came through the mail, others appeared inside the apartment. 1 rested on my desk chair, another lay on the bathroom floor. A third was folded beneath the coffee maker, while the machine was still warm. Each correction I attempted seemed to produce another response. Each denial became another occupant. I stopped answering. The count continued. Water use rose. Food disappeared faster. Towels became damp during the night. Cups accumulated in the sink. My chair changed position while I stood in another room. The apartment never looked crowded. That was the worst part. It remained visually empty. There was still 1 coat beside the door. 1 pair of shoes. 1 bed with 1 side disturbed. The traces suggested a household. The rooms insisted on solitude. I began leaving lights on. It did not help. Sometimes I saw the edge of movement when crossing from 1 room to another, a sleeve passing beyond the kitchen entrance, a hand withdrawing behind the bathroom door. When I looked directly, nothing remained. I never saw a face. I never heard a voice. I wondered how many of the others were doing the same thing. Were they also standing in an empty apartment, listening to my chair scrape across their floor? Did they find my cup warm? Did my footsteps belong to the unexplained sounds that kept them awake? The possibility changed how I moved. I became quieter. I closed doors gently. I placed cups down without sound. I avoided walking through the apartment late at night. It felt like sharing a home with sleeping people. People who did not know I existed. The final correction notice showed 12 occupants. The number no longer frightened me in the same way. 12 was too large for the apartment. It belonged to another kind of measurement. The form did not ask which resident was original. There was no box for that. Official systems do not need to understand what they count. They need only recognize repeated records and assign each one a number. A person can argue with a mistake. It is harder to argue with 12 consistent answers. The night I saw the others began quietly. Rain had stopped before dark. The apartment windows reflected the room. I closed the blinds so I would not keep mistaking those reflections for movement. I made coffee and sat at the dining table. The 12 correction notices were stacked beside me. I read each one in order. 2, 3, 4, 5. The increase looked simple on paper. Each number had once seemed impossible. Now they formed a sequence. At some point, the refrigerator motor stopped. The heating pipes became quiet. The building settled into a silence deeper than normal nighttime stillness. Then the apartment changed. Nothing moved. Nothing opened. The room simply became occupied. A man sat on the couch reading my book. He had my face. He wore the same shirt I was wearing. His posture was the same as mine when I read alone. One ankle rested across the opposite knee. His thumb held the edge of the page. He did not look at me. In the kitchen, another man stood beside the coffee maker. He was also me. He poured coffee into a cup marked with blue tape. A third version of me stood near the bathroom door holding a damp towel. Another worked at my desk. Another searched the hallway closet. They were not transparent. They were not shadows. They looked as solid as I felt. The apartment held them without becoming crowded. Each one occupied the same rooms at a slightly different angle, as if several identical homes had been placed over one another without aligning perfectly. The man at the desk reached for a pen. His hand passed through the space beside the man walking toward the kitchen. Neither reacted. They did not see each other. None of them saw me. I stood slowly. At the same moment, 3 of them stood too, not in imitation. Each had decided independently to move. The man on the couch crossed the living room. Another stepped out of the bedroom. A third approached the window. They passed close enough to touch. They never acknowledged one another. Every face carried the same tired attention. Every pair of eyes searched an apartment that appeared empty. One of them lifted a household questionnaire from the dining table. He looked at the number and frowned. Another picked up a different copy near the couch. A third removed one from the kitchen drawer. Each form said the verified household count was higher than expected. Each man read it alone. I understood then that none of us was hiding from the others. None of us knew how to see the others until that moment. Or perhaps only I had reached the point where the apartment allowed it. The man beside the coffee maker touched his cup. I felt warmth against my own fingertips. The man near the bathroom lifted a towel. I smelled damp soap. The version at the desk opened a drawer. Somewhere inside the apartment, a key moved against wood. The actions produced the traces I had been finding. Mine must have produced traces in their homes. We were not copies living together. We were separate residents occupying the same address, each one surrounded by evidence of the others. Each one certain he lived alone. I looked for a difference that might prove I was first. A scar, a missing button, a change in hair, a different expression. There was none. One version wore the same watch. Another had the same small mark on his hand. The man at the table tapped his pen against the form in the same rhythm I used when thinking. Even their confusion was mine. I no longer knew whether I had started the sequence. Perhaps another version had filled out the first questionnaire. Perhaps I was the second resident the system had detected. Perhaps I had appeared only after he corrected the count. The order no longer mattered. The forms had counted us. The apartment had made room. A knock came from the front door. 3 firm taps. Every version of me stopped. The man on the couch looked toward the hallway. The man in the kitchen set down his cup. The one at the desk raised his head. A dozen identical faces turned toward the same door without seeing one another. The knock came again. A calm voice spoke from the hallway. Census follow-up. We need to confirm exactly how many people live at this address. Every one of us moved to answer, and every one of us believed he would open the door alone. You made it through the night. Rest easy now, knowing you are safe. If you ever wake in the middle of the night, dozens of calm, atmospheric stories are waiting for you right here on the Whisper Archive. Good night, stay safe, and I will see you in the next story.